the Western fantasy journey that began with Game of Thrones. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 226, The Prince Under Attack. Joffrey, what does Uncle Renly look like? In a bedroom and Migos hold fast. The Red Keep in King's Landing. A black-haired little boy, about 4 or 5 years old, who was sitting on a chair and wiping his nose constantly, asked a boy of 7 or 8 years old who was leaning on the side of the chair and looking out the window. They all say that he looks like father, so is he also fat? How should I know? The boy of 7 or 8 years old also had black hair and blue eyes and looked similar to the fat boy, but his expression was full of impatience when he spoke, as if he didn't like his younger brother next to him. I haven't seen him before. Then what are you looking at? The little boy asked blankly. Aren't you looking at your uncle? This is Migos hold fast. The older boy turned his head and glared at the fat boy. They are all in the throne room. How can they be seen here? Then what are you looking at? The fat boy asked repeatedly. What do you care what I'm looking at? Aren't you looking at Uncle Renly? Shut up, you idiot. The boy couldn't help but scold his brother, causing him to pout in grievance, looking like he was about to cry. However, Joffrey didn't care at all. After glaring at his brother, he turned his gaze back to the courtyard under the tower outside the window. He seemed to be observing a white cat walking leisurely in the courtyard, but in fact he was sulking. He was very curious about his Uncle Renly, whom he had never seen before, because he had heard servants talking about him recently, saying that he defeated all the nobles of the River Bay and forced them to show their loyalty to the king, and that he had thwarted the evil conspiracy of Targaryen and made great contributions. He also heard that he was a very powerful knight who participated in many tournaments in the River Bay and won the championship and even formed a knightly order. Life in the Red Castle was boring, and these novel rumors aroused Joffrey's great interest, so when he heard that his uncle had arrived at the Red Castle, he wanted to follow and take a look. But his mother refused him and claimed that he would be called to the banquet in the evening. Why can't he go now, but have to wait until the evening? Joffrey didn't understand, so he was very dissatisfied and thought that his freedom was restricted. I'm a prince. A prince has the right to walk around in his own castle. Why can't I go to the throne room? He muttered softly, secretly wondering if he should sneak out, but, looking at the fat boy beside him who had held back his tears and started playing with his fingers, Joffrey secretly rolled his eyes. If it weren't for this brother who always told tales, he would have slipped away long ago. Why would he hesitate until now? The more he thought about it, the angrier he got, so he couldn't help but say something. You are so annoying, Tommen. This made the fat boy stunned, and then the grievance that had been restrained on his face reappeared, and it was more serious than before. He pursed his lips and burst into tears. You are annoying, Joffrey, you are annoying. You wronged me, you are annoying. The crying quickly attracted the nanny outside the door to rush in, but Joffrey didn't care about it. Instead, he crossed his arms and sneered. Why do I have a brother like you? A crying stupid pig. You are the stupid pig. You are a stupid pig. You are. You are. The fat boy cried even louder, crying and shouting. The nanny who ran over hurriedly picked him up and patted his back to comfort him, while glaring at the big boy with a slightly reproachful look. Your Highness Joffrey, you can't say that about your brother. Is it your business? The black-haired boy said disdainfully. I'm a prince. I can do whatever I want to do with my brother. The nanny was a little annoyed when she heard this, but she knew that the boy in front of her had been spoiled by the queen, and it would not be effective to continue talking, so she couldn't help but sigh, then turned around and left with the crying little fat boy. You are the stupid pig. Stupid pig Joffrey. After the door of the room was closed, the little fat boy's crying voice quickly became weak, which made the black-haired boy feel quite bored. He thought that his stupid brother was really too stupid and meaningless. Thinking of this, he was suddenly stunned and found that there was no one around him to bother him. It seemed that he could take the opportunity to sneak out, so he decided to do it. However, the black-haired boy had just opened the door and had not run a few steps when he suddenly felt a sharp pain in the back of his head. Then his eyes went black, and he knew nothing. This time I also brought the captured Pentas ship and all the people on board. Standing on the red carpeted floor of the throne room, the black-haired young man, wearing an expensive black velvet tight robe, with an upright posture and a heroic aura, said to the fat middle-aged man opposite him, "The ship is at the port, and the people have been escorted into the Red Castle." The young man's voice was steady and full of vigor, which made the black-haired fat man opposite him nod his head, and then patted his shoulder happily. "God bless you. I haven't seen you for a few years. You have improved a lot." As the voice fell, a tall and beautiful blonde woman beside the black-haired fat man also smiled gently. "You are getting more and more handsome, Renly. All the girls in the 7 kingdoms will be fascinated by you. Your Majesty, you are too kind." Renly replied with a smile. "King's Landing is no different from what I saw 10 years ago. The crowds are crowded, and the air is full of stench, but the people in it are no longer the same as before." Brother Robert in front of him was a vigorous and strong young man 10 years ago, but now he has become a fat man with a protruding belly. Queen Cersei beside him looks much more graceful than 10 years ago. The passage of time has made her no longer look like a girl, but she looks more and more beautiful. In addition, the captain of the King's Guard, Barristan Selmy, who was standing not far from the 3 people and quietly watching here under the shadow of the towering Iron Throne, also looked older. His original grey hair has turned white, but he is very energetic. This is a private meeting, or in other words, Renly came here to meet his cheap brother and sister-in-law as soon as he arrived. So besides these 3 familiar people, there is only another unfamiliar King's Guard. After a brief greeting, he found that his brother Robert was quite enthusiastic about his arrival, but Cersei beside him looked very cold under the smiling face. This made Renly think of the rumors he had heard over the years. It was said that the relationship between Robert and Cersei was very bad. What he thought in his heart did not affect Renly's superficial response. His cheap brother Robert seemed to be particularly interested in his life in the River Bay, or the incident a while ago. He asked about the relevant situation again and again. Queen Cersei beside him had been listening quietly, and also seemed curious. In addition, Robert also asked about the cause and effect of the incident on the Crabclaw Peninsula a while ago. Renly answered selectively, and at the same time it can be seen that this cheap brother obviously intended to send troops to the Crabclaw Peninsula. This is also normal. The first traitor who jumped out after the Targaryen incident was exposed. The Crabclaw Peninsula must be punished accordingly. But this matter is not too important in general, so as they talked, the topic between them finally turned to the reason why Renly came here. "I think Dawn is proposing this now. The fundamental purpose is to delay time." When they talked about the marriage, Renly said without hesitation, "The Dornish will not forget what happened in the Red Castle, and they believe that we will not forget it either. Proposing a marriage at this time must be because they are afraid that we will take action against them now." "Do you think we should refuse?" Robert asked. There are also similar voices in the Royal Council, but they hope that Dawn will sincerely express its position in the current situation. After all, there are many ways to stabilize the Iron Throne, and there is no need to propose a marriage. However, Renly has never thought of marrying a Dornish wife. After all, the country is known for its openness, so he nodded after hearing this and said, "If the Martell family is really sincere about the marriage, then let their Princess Irian come to King's Landing in person, instead of letting us go." He was suddenly interrupted before he finished speaking, because someone hurriedly reported that Prince Joffrey and Migos Holdfast in the Red Castle was attacked and was currently seriously injured and unconscious. The king and his wife's face changed drastically. Chapter 227 Hidden Spellcasting. The boy covered by the purple silk blanket looked a little thin, pale, with eyes closed, and his short black hair looked very dull. After observing the little nephew named Joffrey lying unconscious on the bed for a few times, Renly felt that he must have lost too much blood. He was not the only one who came to this conclusion. After carefully examining the boy, the white-bearded Grand Maester Pycelle also said the same thing to the blonde queen standing on the other side of the bed, which caused the already anxious queen to ask a series of questions, whether his life was in danger, and how to treat it. There were not many people in the room. In addition to the queen and the fat king standing next to Renly, there was only one King's Guard that Renly had never seen standing there quietly, with a very ashamed expression. He had led the guards to guard the safety of Meagher's tower before, and now that the prince was attacked, this Kingsguard was to blame. Or rather, he had been reprimanded before, and now after learning the specific situation, the queen stared at him fiercely again. Queen Cersei, who had always been gentle and amiable, became a completely different person in this situation. Her words were scorching and entangled. Renly could understand this, but the noisy room made him feel bored, so he quietly withdrew, while no one was paying attention to him. There were also many people standing outside the room. Barristan, the captain of the Kingsguard, and Jaime Lannister, another acquaintance of Renly, stood guard at the door with stern faces. There were also some other guards. In addition, a young nanny was holding a fat boy of 4 or 5 years old, and kept looking into the room. "Are you Uncle Renly?" After Renly walked out, the fat boy held by the nanny asked in a low voice. Tommen? Brother Robert had only 3 children, so Renly easily guessed the identity of the fat boy. After a brief look, he smiled and said something casually. "Good boy, you look exactly like Robert when he was a child." The fat boy blinked embarrassedly when he heard this. He had a good impression of this uncle whom he met for the first time, but then he asked in a confused tone. "You are not fat? Why do you ask that?" Renly raised his eyebrows and asked. "They all say that you look like my father." The little fat boy replied, "But you are not fat, how can you look like him?" Those were rumors from many years ago. Renly laughed when he heard it. When he was a child, there were always people who said that he and Robert were cut from the same mold, but it might be that the blood in his body was different. The older Renly grew, the more different Renly's appearance was from Robert when he was young. At present, even if Robert's body shape is excluded, their appearance can't be said to be very similar, just a little bit similar. "Your father was not so fat before," Renly answered. "Why did he get fat?" "Because he eats a lot. But I eat a lot too." The little fat boy answered blankly, as if he didn't know that he was also a fat man. Renly had a good impression of this kid. He had black hair, blue eyes, a small round face, and a round appearance that was very pleasing at first glance, but he was confused in his heart. Judging from the hair color, this person is unlikely to be a Lannister, which has changed from the situation in his memory, but Joffrey, Tommen, and the girl Myrcella who he has heard of, but has not seen yet. Robert's 3 children. How come the gender and names are exactly the same as in his previous life? For such a thing, even if it is the same person at the same time and place, there should be billions of possibilities, right? Or is it just a coincidence? He guessed about this, but did not think much about it, but looked at the white-haired Kingsguard at the door. "Sir Barristan, can we talk alone?" "As you wish, my lord." The other party bowed without hesitation after hearing this, and then left the door area at Renly's signal, and walked to the other end of the bright corridor with Renly. The sun shone in from the window beside him, covering the face of the old man standing by the window, but also making the wrinkles on his face more obvious. Renly secretly felt that time passed so quickly, but he did not exchange a few words with this old friend, and asked about the relevant situation of the matter at hand. "Has this happened before in Meagher's Holdfast?" When Renly was in the room, he noticed that his cheap elder brother looked a little strange, but he didn't ask much at that time. Prince Joffrey suffered a similar attack 2 years ago. The white-haired and white-robed captain of the Kingsguard replied, "Also in Meagher's Holdfast." Renly frowned when he heard that. "Didn't find the murderer?" "No." Barristan smiled bitterly. "There were several suspected targets, but after investigation, we found that none of them were the suspects, so we replaced all the servants in Meagher's Holdfast afterwards. We thought that there would be no more problems, but now." He sighed and didn't say anything else. The attack on the royal family, no matter what the situation was always the responsibility of the Kingsguard. Maybe it was the Faceless Men. Renly thought for a while and said, "You have heard of the Faceless Men, sir?" "Of course, they are some difficult guys, and it is difficult to find them." The other party replied, but frowned again. "But the Faceless Men are assassins." Prince Joffrey was not assassinated, but attacked. This is indeed very strange, Renly thought. What's the point of attacking a child without killing him? However, if he loses too much blood. "I heard that the queen has a red-robed woman in the palace?" he suddenly asked. "Lady Melisandre is very important to the queen." Barristan heard it, but after the incident in the river, she ran away. Barristan couldn't help frowning. The red-robed woman escaped at the right time. She disappeared before they went to catch her. It's hard not to wonder if the queen leaked the news. Does she have any accomplices in the city? Renly asked again. No accomplices. Barristan shook his head. The red-robed woman has always been alone, and we haven't seen her contact with anyone except the queen. Renly nodded and asked a few more questions. He didn't find any clues, so he had to give up. At this time, the Red Keep Meagher's tower was discussing the attack on the prince, and in a dark cellar in the Red Keep, a raging fire was secretly and mysteriously burning. The shadow dragged on the rock wall swayed continuously as the fire expanded, and a low, hoarse female voice chanted complicated and difficult spells. In the cramped space, there was a faint smell of blood. Under the light of the flames, a tall figure in a red robe stood in front of a brazier, with her red hair loose. She lowered her head and stared at the blazing fire, muttering to herself, her delicate heart-shaped face full of solemnity and dignity. However, as she continued to stare at the fire in front of her, and as the spell in her mouth gradually weakened, the expression on her face, which should have been stern, became more and more stunned, and finally filled with surprise. How is this possible? Chapter 228 Housework. Renly arrived in King's Landing in the afternoon, and then the prince was attacked, so the welcome dinner that King Robert had planned to hold was moved to the next day. A large-scale search was carried out in the Red Keep that day, but no useful clues were found. Only a laundryman claimed to have seen a maid hurriedly walking out of the tower where Prince Joffrey was, but when asked to describe the maid's appearance, she couldn't say it. So all the maids in Meagher's hold were replaced by Queen Cersei. All this has nothing to do with Renly, because he is no longer a core member of the royal family, or Renly, who belongs to Baratheon's concubine, can no longer live in Meagher's hold in the core of the Red Keep. He was arranged to live in a high tower not far from the throne room of the Red Keep. The guards were a little loose, but it was also quieter. But after waking up, this silence was quietly broken. It was still dawn, and the fat King Robert came to the door. How do you feel about returning to King's Landing? After giving Renly a hug, King Robert asked with a smile. The meeting yesterday was very brief, and not much was said. Nothing has changed. Renly answered seriously. It's just that I didn't expect your brother's size. Watch your words, Kit. Robert's expression became serious, and he seemed a little angry. I'm the king. A fat king? A fat king is also a king. As he said this, the fake expression on Robert's face suddenly disappeared, and he looked at Renly with a happy face. Good boy, I'm happy to see you. Baratheon finally has a smart man. The king is much more majestic than a smart man. In some people's eyes, the king is just a clown. Majestic? Robert snorted, but seemed not to want to talk about this, so he changed the subject. Have you dealt with the Dragonstone matter? If you're done, just stay in King's Landing to help me. I plan to let you be my Lord Advocate. Gullion Swan is really unqualified and asked me to send him back to the Stormlands. I've never heard of the position of Lord Advocate. Renly shook his head when he heard this. The Lord Chancellor is one of the 7 members of the Council of the King and is a core minister of the kingdom. Although Renly is interested in serving in King's Landing, it is too hasty to take this position right away. Do you think I know how to be a king? Robert said indifferently. The Lord Chancellor is just to manage the Red Keep prison and give advice when I or old Jon attend the trial. How difficult can this be? It is not a difficult task for you. If I'll let you be the Minister of Finance, that would be a difficult task for you. It does sound easy, but it is certainly not so simple for a senior official of the court. However, Renly did not say much about this, but changed the subject and said, the matter of Dragonstone has not been dealt with yet, mainly because I have not found a suitable candidate for the chief steward. Then let Andrew continue to be your acting lord, until you find a suitable candidate. Robert answered casually. Renly nodded when he heard this, and then they talked about other things. It was not a serious matter, but some family-related matters. There are only 3 Baratheon brothers, but Robert seems to be very dissatisfied with Stannis. He implicitly accuses Renly, the second brother, of being inflexible and stubborn. Renly has not seen Stannis since he came, but he has heard that he is currently in the Stormlands dealing with territory affairs, and will not be back for a while. Robert also mentioned his 3 children to Renly, and he seemed to be a little worried about them. thinking that these three little guys are not smart enough, and he doesn't know what they will become in the future. He also mentioned the current situation in the Seven Kingdoms, but Robert was obviously full of impatience with government affairs. After a few words, he changed the topic to other aspects. Renly could see that the cheap elder brother with a rough beard in front of him was very dissatisfied and even disgusted with everything at the moment, and this disgust was fully revealed in the last sentence he said before leaving. I can see that you don't want to be arranged to marry by me, so forget it. No matter what those Dornish people are up to, as long as they dare to take a step out of Dorne, I will dare to smash their heads with a hammer. I have become this kind of character, and I can't let you become like this. After Robert left, Renly didn't stay quiet for long. The visit of Jon Arryn, the Prime Minister, broke the silence in the room again. After a simple greeting, the bold old man went straight to the point. What do you think of the current situation in the Seven Kingdoms, Renly? This thin old man with no teeth, but still strong spirit seemed to think highly of Renly, and he didn't put on any eldership in his words. Except Dorne, I don't see any big problems. Renly replied, but passively waiting for the Targaryens to attack is not the best strategy. We should find a way to take the initiative and take advantage of them before they are ready. The Iron Throne has no power in the free trade cities. The old man replied helplessly. How about winning over allies? Renly suggested. Targaryen formed an alliance with the disciples in the free cities, but those disciples cannot be without enemies. We have tried, Jon Arryn replied, but they prefer to watch. Renly said nothing more after hearing this. After talking with old Jon about the current situation and possible solutions, he personally escorted the old man who came to express his goodwill out of the tower. Then he began to think about whether to use seeds to extend the life of this old man. As the king's adoptive father, and having personally led an army to rebel for his adopted son, his loyalty to Robert is beyond doubt. And his elder brother. At noon, news came that Prince Joffrey had awakened. He seemed to be fine, but he was weak and needed to be nursed back to health, but he knew nothing about the attack. That night, a grand banquet was held in the throne room of the Red Castle to welcome the arrival of the Duke of Dragonstone. At the banquet, Renly saw many faces that interested him. Robert's children, the frail little heir of Jon Arryn, the Duke of the Vale, the long unseen Lord Mace Tyrell, who had become a fat man, and Grand Maester Pycelle, who was ruddy-faced and about to turn 80, but looked as if he was only in his 60s, and a bald fat man in a pink robe, with a charming and grotesque manner. In addition, there were many noble courtiers in King's Landing who attended the banquet. They were very enthusiastic about Renly, and this enthusiasm was not just because of their status. Renly was able to handle it with ease. His life as an adopted son of Highgarden made him impeccable in etiquette. His every move seemed elegant and natural, but he also had the demeanor of a great noble, which attracted the attention of many people who were not interested in him. However, just as the black-haired young man was constantly facing enthusiastic chatterboxes one after another at the banquet, the door of his bedroom in a tower of the Red Castle was quietly pushed open, and a red-robed figure stepped in, looking around, and finally fixed his eyes on an ordinary-looking oak box under the bed in the room. There is another chapter in the evening. Chapter 229 Complex People. There were many people participating in the banquet, but the one that interested Renly the most was not someone else, but a white-bearded old man whom he had disliked in the past, Grand Maester Pycelle. From the outside, this old man in his 70s was not very eye-catching. He was hunched over, wearing a dark brown bachelor's robe loosely on his body. His bald forehead was covered with age spots. The white beard scattered around his neck covered many bachelor's necklaces that looked very heavy. He was slow to raise his arms and kick his legs, but he was very energetic. The reason why Renly was interested in this man was simple. When he was in the Reach, he had heard about some of his strange situations in recent years. At the same time, he had not forgotten the fate of the chicken leg when the Chaos product first appeared. So even though the Grand Maester was low-key and inconspicuous at the banquet, Renly took the initiative to find him and led the topic to pets. I never sell my dogs, my lord. The old man sitting in the corner answered Renly's question about pet dogs. But if you are interested, my lord Duke, I can give you one. Yes, although I'm reluctant. I have given some away before, but I have never sold them. In fact, as a Grand Maester, I don't care much about money and other things, and you have to know, my lord, at my age. The old man kept on talking, sounding a little annoying, and Renly curled his lips while listening. If this man doesn't sell dogs, then who raises those special pet dogs circulating on the market? But he didn't intend to expose the Grand Maester's lies, nor did he interrupt his nagging. Many things can be done casually when you are a child, but doing them as an adult will appear to be very targeted. Then I wonder how the Grand Maester raises his dogs. When Purcell paused for a breath, Renly asked, I've seen a few in the riverbend, and they are much smarter than ordinary pets. There's no trick, Grand Maester Purcell replied slowly. I just raise dogs as a fun thing, and there's not much I can do about it. Why are they smart? This may be because I'm a Grand Maester, and they've been influenced unconsciously when they're around me. I think you should know, your majesty, that Grand Maesters are much more knowledgeable and wise than ordinary Maesters, and I can rank among the top among all the Grand Maesters. This is not my own bragging, but the evaluation of me by the Cardinal Council of the Citadel in recent years. You know the Cardinal Council, your lord, that's the Citadel. On the surface, Renly listened quietly, but secretly he kept rolling his eyes. It felt like the old man was really shameless for talking so much, but he could also feel that, except for some aspects, what Grand Maester Purcell said was basically true. He didn't know why his dog was different. Thinking about the werewolf monster he had encountered when he was in the Free family in the River Bay, and then thinking about the banquet where the chicken leg appeared, Renly thought that there was obviously some connection between the two, but the alienation effect of the mark was already elusive to him, and some things that he didn't understand were not a big deal. After chatting with this person for a few more words, Renly took the initiative to say goodbye and left. Purcell stood up tremblingly and saw him off. After walking a few steps slowly, he found that the black-haired young man who left didn't pay attention to him, so he turned around and sat back nimbly. Thinking about what he had just said, he couldn't help smacking his lips. I can sell a dog for several gold royals, how can I just give it away? That kid is much more sensible than when he was a kid, but he's not easy to fool. Muttering to himself, Grand Maester Purcell suddenly saw Renly, who had left, talking face to face with a fat man in a pink robe and bald head, and couldn't help but touch his beard. What is that octopus spider up to now? After 10 years, the Duke is so much taller than me. I really miss the old days. The fat man in a pink robe, who was full of powder, sighed as he spoke. He took the initiative to move over when he saw that Renly had finished talking with Purcell. I think Lord Varys hasn't changed at all in the past 10 years. Renly answered seriously, his bald head is still as shiny as ever. This made the fat man in pink robe grin, and then he said helplessly, there's nothing I can do about it. I cherish my hair very much, but unfortunately I have the same problem as the Prime Minister, so every day, when I see the Prime Minister's forehead at the royal meeting, I always give up the idea of growing my hair. Renly agreed with this. He thought that, if he really had a Mediterranean bald head, it would be better to shave his head. But he didn't take it seriously. 8 out of 10 words of the man in front of him were false. Even the hair problem was a lie. I really don't know if he has become a liar or hopes to increase his sense of humor. What he thought in his heart did not make Renly show any contempt on his face. After chatting with him for a while with a smile on his face, he found that the intelligence chief nicknamed Octopus Spider intentionally or unintentionally turned the topic to Dawn. The Martell family of Dawn wants to marry their beautiful Princess Irian to you. According to Dornish law, Princess Irian is the heir of the Martell family. The Martell family ruled Dawn, but the customs of Dawn were different from those of other places in the Seven Kingdoms. For example, the head of the Martell family was called a prince, not a duke, and the prince's daughter was also called a princess. Renly shrugged after hearing this. So I think this is a conspiracy of the Dornish people. It is simply exaggerated to marry a family heir to an insignificant person like me. You are not a small person, Lord Renly. Varys flattered. As a member of the royal family, how many people in the Seven Kingdoms can be more noble than you? Renly did not comment on this. It is very special to say that his identity is special, but in fact it is nothing big. With a king brother, he is treated differently in many aspects, but apart from this identity, he is just the lord of a small broken island, with status but no power. The Prime Minister believes that Dawn's move is to hope that the royal family will not misunderstand that they have ulterior motives at this juncture. At the same time, your identity is completely in line with Dawn's goal of marrying the Iron Throne. Renly did not speak, and the bold Varys spoke on his own. The Dawn side asked you to lead the team to discuss in person, and did not expect anything else. The Prime Minister believes that, even if Dawn wants to make some small moves, the Iron Throne will not suffer any loss in this regard, so why not choose to believe it? Renly smiled when he heard it. To be honest, this is true. Although he is a Baratheon, he ranks very low in the order of succession to the throne, and he is just an insignificant younger brother of King Robert, with no hostage or prisoner value. In other words, even if he died in Dawn, no one would feel sorry. But he himself did not think so. Even if Robert did not say those words to him in the morning, Renly did not plan to go to Dawn. It was completely different from the Iron Islands. The environment was a desert instead of the sea, and water was scarce. He was not sure that he could escape successfully if he really encountered danger. He hoped that Baratheon could become the winner in this power struggle that had slowly begun, but he did not want to try to win with his own life. In other words, he hoped that Baratheon would win because he wanted to ensure his own safety, not for the honor of his family and his power. If he really risked his life to take risks, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? What he was thinking was not revealed. Renly did not say anything about the words of the fat man in pink robes in front of him. The other party seemed to have just said it casually and changed the topic to other places. After chatting for a few more words, he took the initiative to leave. Renly narrowed his eyes at this, and then ignored it, and continued to participate in the banquet. The welcome banquet hosted by his brother Robert was not large in scale, but basically all the nobles in King's Landing were invited. At the same time, the prepared programs and food were very rich. It was not until the second half of the night that the banquet slowly dispersed. Renly therefore returned to his residence in the Red Castle. However, as soon as he opened the door, he suddenly discovered that in this house, that should have been empty, there was a woman fainted on the carpet. 12 chapters left. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 230 Melisandre. The woman in a grey servant's dress was lying motionless on the silver grey carpet beside the bed. At first glance, it seemed that the maid who came to clean up had died of a sudden illness on the spot. But when Renly stepped closer, he suddenly found that an oak box under his bed had been dragged out and opened, and the maid's hand was on the edge of the box. Looking down, the box was full of scarlet. After a few glances, Renly frowned. Where did the eyeball go? He didn't think much, but turned his eyes back to the woman at his feet. There seemed to be nothing special about the long brown hair, grey dress, and freckles on her face. After a few glances, Renly suddenly squatted down and pulled off a ruby collar from the maid's neck. Then he saw that the unconscious person's body suddenly became trance and finally changed into another appearance. The one-piece red robe was quite loose, and the figure lying on the ground was slender and graceful. The copper-red long hair was scattered on the grey carpet, which was in sharp contrast, and also covered half of the delicate cheek. Renly thought of a name in his mind, Melisandre, the red-robed woman, the spellcaster in his previous life, and also a disciple favored by the queen. He had never seen this person, but the fact that a woman wore a red robe was very familiar to him. However, Renly could not imagine why this person could sneak into his room, and also, he looked sideways at the open box, and the horror inside made his eyelids jump. Then he buckled the box, and pushed it under the bed. This thing was naturally the drowned god mentioned by the spokesperson of the seven gods, or a derivative of the drowned god. Because he was afraid that it would cause any trouble, Renly also brought this thing when he came to King's Landing, but he did not expect to attract an unexpected person at this time. He had heard that the red-robed woman had escaped before, but he didn't expect that she was still in the Red Keep. This situation made it difficult for Renly not to think that Queen Cersei had secretly hidden her, but it was useless to think about this at this time. After dealing with the box, He then used a dagger to cut the velvet curtain covering the bed into a rope, and then tied the unconscious woman tightly to a chair. Then he began to sit on another chair and wait quietly. At midnight, it was pitch black outside the window. The dim light of the candle was burning faintly on the top of the fireplace not far away. The hazy light made the room look very gloomy, and also stretched the figures of the two sitting on the chairs infinitely. Time passed slowly, and the red-robed woman with her head lowered, and her red hair covering most of her cheeks had not moved, but Renly's intention, that had been injected into her body before, could feel that the dead mind was gradually reviving, and it seemed that it would not take long for her to wake up completely. However, just as Renly was ready to interrogate her, the thoughts in the other person's body suddenly dissipated, which made him slightly stunned, and then a hoarse female voice came into his ears. The false god has instilled power into you, but this power cannot compete with the true god. Along with the voice, the red-robed woman with her head lowered slowly raised her head, revealing a pair of deep red eyes and a delicate heart-shaped face under her messy long hair. The woman's expression was solemn and solemn. Although she was bound, she did not look panicked at all. The thoughts that had been injected into the other person's body dissipated, and at the same time, he could not sense any emotional fluctuations. This made Renly's mentality, which he originally thought to have the upper hand, unconsciously shudder, and his heart became much more alert. This was the first time he had encountered such a situation in more than 10 years. "Your name is Melisandre?" he asked seriously. "As you said." The other party replied hoarsely. "Why did you appear in my room? I think you have seen the reason." "Box. It's evil." "What do you mean?" Renly raised his eyebrows. This person spoke in a mysterious way, and it seemed that it was difficult to communicate normally. However, he could see clearly that the woman came to him not because of him, but because of his box. "The evil in the box cannot be guessed by mortals, but I think you should know something about it," the red-haired woman tied to the chair said with a flickering look in her eyes. "You have been infected by evil. You need to be purified, otherwise death will come to you. Let me go. I can save you." Renly ignored the other person's words, but after looking at her expressionless face for a few times, he suddenly reached out and pinched her smooth face. This caught the originally solemn woman off guard, and her pupils shrank unconsciously. Obviously, she did not expect this man to suddenly make a move, but before she could say anything, Renly asked back, "Is this how you fooled the queen? Mortal ignorance will destroy you." Melisandre's tone remained calm. "Was you related to the attack on the prince before?" Renly asked another question. "I heard that you ran away, but obviously you didn't. You have been hiding in the Red Castle all this time. Let me go. I can solve this trouble for you. Does your power come from R'hllor, the Lord of Light?" Mortals cannot call the name of the great true god directly, otherwise they will be. Before she finished her words, she was suddenly hit on the head by Renly, which made her expression stunned again, and then her eyes stared at Renly. "Are you trying to irritate me? But this will not have any effect in the end. An ignorant person mistakenly sends out a..." Her nose was pinched, so that the words in her mouth were involuntarily unclear, and Renly saw a hint of annoyance in her eyes, so he asked again, "Your name is Melisandre?" Repetition is meaningless. "Your name is Melisandre?" Mortal names are nothing but, "Your name is Melisandre?" Every time this person opened her mouth to speak, she would be interrupted. At the same time, Renly could also find that every time he interrupted her, the anger in her eyes became more and more obvious, until Renly repeated the question for the 7th time. She couldn't help but raise her voice. "You already know the answer. Why do you keep teasing me? I want you to answer directly." Renly heard, "Your name is Melisandre?" "Yes." "Why did you come to my room?" "Evil attracted me, because of your box." "Why do you say that?" "It is a false god, a creation of evil and death, and an enemy of the great true god." "So you plan to destroy it?" "Yes." "You didn't succeed. I underestimated it." She stopped talking here, and then stared at Renly, as if she suddenly reacted, and said something that had nothing to do with this matter. "You must let me go, otherwise your family will inevitably be in disaster." "Because of your god?" Renly asked disapprovingly. "A lion cannot walk with a deer," Melisandre replied. "A chain binds you tightly together, but this chain is not made of hard steel, but fragile bronze." Renly narrowed his eyes when he heard it. Chapter 231 Cooperation. Because of this sentence, the room suddenly fell into silence. Renly squinted his eyes and stared at the beautiful woman tied to the chair in front of him. He didn't say anything for a while. The other party looked back at him quietly, showing a calm attitude. "Why do you say that?" After a moment of confrontation, Renly couldn't help asking. 9 years ago, Queen Cersei gave birth to a son, a blonde baby boy. Melisandre replied calmly, "Your brother Robert was commanding the war in the Iron Islands at that time." Although he had expected it, when he heard the first sentence, Renly was still quite surprised to hear the exact news at this time. Seeing this, the other party smiled and said, "Not long after I arrived in King's Landing, Queen Cersei secretly came to me and asked me if I could change a person's hair color. Then, changing from gold to black is just a small trick for the true god, and I have used this small trick many times. First it was a baby boy, then a baby girl, and finally a baby boy again." Melisandre said faintly, "What this represents, I think you should understand." Renly didn't say anything, staring at the other party's calm appearance. His mind was full of thoughts. Was she telling the truth? Renly couldn't be sure, but he thought that, even if she lied to excuse herself, under normal circumstances, this person would not think of such a thing as hair, right? So this is true? Then if it is true, what does it mean to deliberately change the baby's hair color? Guilty? Blonde hair turning into black hair. This may not sound like anything to ordinary people, but the rumors that once circulated in King's Landing have never been forgotten. The incest between the Lannister siblings, the blonde. Renly frowned. It is unlikely that this news is false, but if it is true, after the incident, I thought there would be no accidents, but I didn't expect that Cersei would be so bold. Isn't she afraid of getting killed? I thought Lannister was the most steadfast ally of Baratheon before, but now it seems that this is simply a time bomb. Thinking about all this in his mind, Renly couldn't imagine how his cheap elder brother would react after knowing this, but it was obvious that the relationship between the two families would break down. However, this kind of thing is nothing in normal times, but at this moment, when the situation needs to be stabilized to resist the return of Targaryen. "You told me this so easily?" He couldn't help asking. "This kind of magic won't last forever. It must be recast every once in a while to maintain it." Melisandre replied, "And this requires me to prepare it myself for a long time." "So it was you who attacked the prince yesterday? I need to use his blood to cast magic. Did the queen cooperate with you to enter Meagher's holdfast? Not only Meagher's holdfast, but also this place. Why did you come to me? Because of evil." Melisandre's words still seemed mysterious, but she gave an explanation in the next sentence. "The power of the true god is disturbed by this evil. I can't cast spells smoothly, so I must destroy it." And at the same time she paused and stared at Renly. "The lost lambs also need the great true god to save them." Renly automatically ignored the last sentence and began to think about the previous one. Obviously, the red-robed woman was sure that he didn't dare to take the risk of doing anything to her, but in fact, Renly was now thinking about changing his hair color. Can the 7 gods do it? If it can be done, then this person in front of me, no matter what, this matter must not be exposed at the moment, otherwise the situation will inevitably become turbulent. But, if this is true, why didn't this person use this to create chaos? She is the Red Woman. Her camp belongs to the disciples. She should stand on the side of Targaryen, and Targaryen currently needs a chaotic Westeros. Why didn't she expose this matter? Is it because she is not sure of causing chaos, or, looking at the calm face of the Red Woman in front of him, Renly's mind raced, and he suddenly asked, "Are you going to disclose this matter at a critical moment? For example, when we face the Targaryens head on?" "I will cooperate with the queen." Melisandre replied, "She helps me, and I help her. If the Lannisters suddenly rebel when the two armies are fighting, it will be a devastating blow to us." Renly ignored this person's words and said to himself, "It may even determine the victory or defeat in one fell swoop. You are too suspicious." Melisandre looked at Renly quietly. "Not all priests who believe in the Lord of Light belong to the Church of the Red God, and not all people wearing red robes stand on the side of Targaryen. The High Priest Benero decided to cooperate with the Targaryen. That was his choice, not mine. Maybe you are telling the truth." Renly nodded. But why should I take this risk? If I kill you now, maybe as you said, the hair color of the 3 children will change soon, but we can completely treat this change as someone's sudden trick, rather than being exposed in the middle of the process. Melisandre narrowed her eyes when she heard this. Renly smiled at this. Choose to believe you, let you go, and we may suffer a devastating blow in the future. Kill you now? There may be some unnecessary troubles, but I think this trouble can be solved. What do you think? This sentence completely shifted the initiative of the conversation back to Renly, but from the look on his face, he didn't see much panic. Killing an ally by mistake will only take you one step closer to destruction. Believe me, the power of the true god resonates in my body. You can't kill me, you can only anger me. Renly didn't say anything after hearing this, but a dagger appeared in his hand. After deftly turning it around his fingertips for a few times, he stood up and walked to the other side. After looking at her white and smooth neck for a few times, Renly suddenly stabbed with the dagger in his hand. The wind was blowing fiercely in her ears. At this moment, the calmness on Melisandre's face completely turned into panic. Her body couldn't help but tense up, and she couldn't help but close her eyes tightly. However, after half a day, she didn't feel any pain in her neck. There was only a touch of cold metal rubbing and provoking on it. Goosebumps couldn't help but appear. The red-robed woman turned her head and met a pair of strange ice blue eyes. Why don't you kill me? She wanted to keep herself calm, but the words she blurted out unconsciously had a tremor. Because it suddenly occurred to me. The black-haired young man said in an inexplicable tone, what the Targaryens can give you, we can also do, even more easily than them. So, why don't you cooperate with us? The Queen and I have always been in a cooperative relationship. Melisandre couldn't help but say. It's not you. Renly corrected her. It's you. Chapter 232 Son of Prophecy. As the sky slowly bloomed into a fish belly white, a freckled woman dressed as a servant hurriedly walked out of a tower of the Red Castle. The dawn was very quiet, and the sound of footsteps on the stone brick surface was faint but loud. The words she had said to the young man before echoed in her mind. The maid couldn't help but look back at the silent towering tower with a deep gaze, as if she could see a black-haired figure inside through the rock. Cooperation. She murmured the word and couldn't help frowning. Why can't we cooperate? She thought about this question. More than 10 years ago, an oracle came from the Red Temple of Volantis, and the Lord of Lightrella called on all believers to go to the Westeros continent in the west to find and destroy the so-called gates to the old world. So she and many other red-robed priests set foot on this strange land. But unlike others, after arriving here, she did not plan to find the clueless door herself, but decided to cooperate with the local nobles of Westeros. This is not easy, because the belief in false gods firmly occupies this continent, and the lords here are not friendly to their existence. Later, by chance, she got in touch with the Queen, and was able to indirectly command many people to help find the so-called old door. However, this treatment was completely shattered not long ago. The news from the River Bay made the lords of this continent completely turn their faces against their existence. Under the influence of the general environment, even if Queen Cersei protected her, she had to hide first. So she hid until this moment, until this situation appeared. In fact, what she said to Renly was right. She did work with the mentality of cooperating with the Queen, not as an insider or anything else, because she did not think that the choice of the Supreme Priest Binero was correct. Because of faith, her colleagues encountered countless bad luck in the Westeros continent for 10 years, and the oracle issued by the true god did not make much progress, and the church was very anxious about this. But this is not the real reason why they chose to cooperate with Targaryen, or it is only one of the reasons, but not the main one. The main reason is that the Supreme Priest Binero believes that a little girl among the Targaryen who was exiled overseas is the legendary child of prophecy. After the long summer, the stars will weep blood, and the cold darkness will cover the world. At this terrifying moment, a warrior will pull out a burning sword from the flames. That sword is the Lightbringer, the red sword of heroes. The one who holds the sword is the reincarnation of Azor Ahai, and he will drive away the darkness. The prophecy recorded in the ancient book of Shea has been spread for thousands of years. At the same time, many priests of the Red Temple have predicted that a terrible disaster will be brewing at the end of the world soon. It is a sign of the rise and revival of the ancient alien god, one of the only two true gods in the world. Although most priests of the Red God Church have been too busy to take care of it in recent years, because of the old gate, many senior officials have not forgotten this doomsday prophecy. The supreme priest Benero believes that the Azor Ahai in the prophecy is a Targaryen girl who fled her homeland, so the entire Red God Church began to cooperate with Targaryen to overthrow the existing regime in Westeros and support him to take the throne. Melisandre didn't know how the high priest determined this, but she had the opposite attitude, because she had seen the little girl named Daenerys, who was weak and innocent, and full of feminine weakness. How could she be the reincarnation of a hero? The girl didn't even have the strength to pick up an ordinary iron sword, not to mention the sword of a hero. After the long summer, the stars wept blood, and Azor Ahai would be reborn in the land of smoke and salt. This sentence was the only clue to find the reincarnation of a hero in the prophecy. According to Melisandre, the girl was indeed born in the land of smoke and salt on Dragonstone, but she didn't have the slightest heroic appearance. So she thought that the child of prophecy was someone else, and the decision of the high priest Benero to support a little girl to take the throne and enter the Westeros continent was completely wrong in Melisandre's view. Because this would only consume the power of the entire human race for no reason, and would not be of any benefit to the future disaster. The right thing to do should be to cooperate with the local lords of Westeros like she did. In fact, if the church led by Benero had not suddenly formed an alliance with the Targaryens and used conspiracy to expose, she could have used her relationship with the queen to gain more power, to do things for them, whether it was to find the door or to fight against the darkness, instead of excluding the entire Red God Church at this time. What a pity. Murmuring secretly, the maid stepped into an empty ruin, then opened a wooden door on the ground in the corner and walked into the cellar. The sudden change a while ago disrupted her plan, and she didn't know what to do for a while, but at this moment, after a secret conversation with the young duke, Melisandre regained some hope in her heart. She never thought that it was a good thing for humans to fight each other, and she also knew that many people in the church had objections to Benero's decision, so why couldn't she get out of it? Even if she couldn't change what had happened, at least she should prevent the war between the two sides from happening, and then find a way to work together. After all, whether it is the Gate of the Old Ones, which has no clues, or the ancient alien gods who are constantly accumulating power in the dark, they all want to bring this world into destruction. If they start fighting internally at this time, they will only be unlucky in the end. Benero is stubborn. I can't go to his daughter negotiate directly, so I need to find another way. Walking in the dark cellar, the maid murmured in a low voice, but another thought suddenly flashed through her mind. After the long summer, the stars will weep blood, and Azor Ahai will be reborn in the land of smoke and salt. The land of smoke and salt, the land of smoke and salt. Isn't the territory of the young man just now the land of smoke and salt on Dragonstone? For a moment, her steps unconsciously paused. Thinking about the previous things, she found that compared to the cowardly little girl, the young man named Renly was more suitable for the title of the Son of Prophecy, no matter how you look at it. But, thinking of the box filled with the breath of false gods and the strange impact she suffered when opening the box, Melisandre couldn't help but frown. The woman who was talking in a mysterious way was in a dilemma. Renly was sitting at his desk, thinking after sending her away. He did not have too many expectations for the so-called cooperation. It would be best if there was an effect, but if there was no effect, there would be no loss. Killing the red-robed woman here could temporarily solve the problem left by the hair color problem, but this problem could actually be solved by other methods. Besides, he could not think of how much benefit killing the red-robed woman would bring to him. Instead, it would be better to make a move of cooperation, or try to put the chess piece into the enemy. I hope it will be effective. Looking forward to this in his heart, Renly felt a little headache after thinking about the previous things, but then he raised his hand and touched the 7 gods mark on his left wrist. After a moment of trance, he heard a pleasant female voice. Have you agreed to make a deal with the gods? Let's not talk about that for now. Renly responded. Can you change the color of human hair? The gods can do that. The other party replied, but it can't last long. How long can it last? It depends on the person. Depends on the person? Renly thought, how can dyeing hair depend on the person? but he didn't waste any time on it. After hearing this, he directly stated his purpose. My brother Robert, I want to make his hair golden. How long can it last? Chapter 233 Minister of Justice. The rustling sound produced by the friction between the feather pen and the parchment continued in the quiet room. Lines of black characters with the smell of ink gradually occupied the light yellow parchment surface and finally stopped at the signature position. After the red stag seal was stamped, Renly hung the newly written letter on the desk in front of the window and then picked up a heavy book about the laws of the Seven Kingdoms next to it and read it for a while. He stood up and picked up the letter that had been dried and walked out the door until he turned the last page. It was already the 6th day since Renly arrived in King's Landing. During this time, in addition to reaching a preliminary cooperation with the red-robed woman, he was mainly busy preparing for his next post in King's Landing. Although Renly came suddenly because of the Dawn incident, there was nothing to take care of in Dragonstone, so he did not plan to go back. He even wrote this letter at the moment, preparing to call his follower Tob, who was in Dragonstone, and at the same time, let him bring some seeds. That's right, Renly didn't bring the seeds of power to King's Landing, but hid them in Dragonstone. No one except him and Tob knew where they were hidden. After learning about many hidden dangers that night, Renly thought he had to prepare for some situations that might arise in the future, so the idea in his mind resurfaced again. He was going to strengthen the fighting, or survival, abilities of his relatives and allies, lest they be killed without knowing it. The Red Castle was still bustling with servants and attendants, clerical officials from various departments. This royal castle was not only the residence of the royal family, but also the power center of the Seven Kingdoms. Many people on the road greeted Renly, and he would nod politely until his footsteps reached the Maester's Tower in the southeast corner of the Red Castle, which looked no different from other towers. Under normal circumstances, well, this letter will reach Dragonstone tonight. This is mainly because I'm quite good at this. In the spacious room, Grand Maester Purcell sat behind the desk and slowly said to Renly, I'm particularly good at training ravens. In fact, Lord Renly, my training results are very effective. Those noisy little guys never want to stay outside for even a quarter of an hour. Of course, Lord Renly, there are unexpected situations, but this situation is relatively rare. The main reason is that each raven has a different personality, but they look basically the same. When I get older, sometimes I can't tell them apart. It may be a habit. The person in front of him always can't help but make a long speech when speaking, but Renly didn't have anything urgent at the moment, so he didn't urge him. He didn't speak until the other party finished speaking with a lot of words. I have finished reading this book, Maester Purcell. Do you have any other suitable recommendations? He said while pushing the big book on the desk in front of him forward. As for books on law, I think you have basically read them all. The white-bearded old man said thoughtfully. However, the duties of the Minister of Justice also include managing prisons and the capital garrison, so I suggest that you can learn about this kind of knowledge next. Renly nodded when he heard this, and then asked a seemingly casual question. Have you discovered anything new about my brother's hair color? I think it must be a strange witchcraft. The Grand Maester said without hesitation. You know, Lord Renly, the wise King Robert signed the hunt for those pagans. They must be here to take revenge, so I once suggested that we should strictly protect His Majesty's safety during this period. At the same time, I also think that researching the Red Castle is a necessary measure. Not long after Prince Joffrey was attacked, His Majesty, there have been constant problems in the Red Castle recently. Not long after the prince was attacked, King Robert, who originally had black hair, suddenly turned into a fat blonde man after a dinner. This situation immediately caused a panic. The person involved was also full of confusion. After washing his hair over and over again for a long time under the service of the servants, his hair color did not change. So His Majesty thought that someone must have cast some witchcraft to plot against him. Others agreed with this guess. This guess is in line with the current environment. Due to some strange events that have occurred continuously in various parts of the Seven Kingdoms in recent years, the people of King's Landing have already had a certain understanding of things like witchcraft and magic, or they are no longer ignorant of it as before. The pagans are usually proficient in a few special magic tricks, such as bursting fire out of thin air and changing living people, which have been used to fool people in various parts of the Seven Kingdoms over the years. So in the absence of any clues, this incident was identified as a revenge action by the pagans, and His Majesty was very angry, so that the clearance and search of disciples inside and outside King's Landing became more serious. He obviously didn't expect that the culprit of all this was his own brother, and he didn't understand what Renly's purpose was. Every time they met, he still looked happy, which made Renly feel ashamed for no reason. However, considering the overall situation, he thought it was not a big deal to temporarily wrong his brother for a while. He had been wronged for many years anyway. After chatting with the Grand Maester in his room for a while, Renly searched in the library of the Red Keep for a while, and finally returned to his room with an essay book written by a Lord Chancellor 100 years ago to continue reading. Robert was ready to let Renly be Lord Chancellor, but this required him to have a certain amount of knowledge. At least, he had to be familiar with the laws and customs of the Seven Kingdoms. However, this was not a very complicated thing. On the one hand, he had seen the Duke of Mace hold trials when he was in the Reach, and on the other hand, the general laws of the Seven Kingdoms were basically unified and relatively simple. For theft, amputation of hands, strong chopping, and ordinary minor crimes, the punishment was whipping, or mutilation according to the experience of previous trial records, or simply being sent to the wall as a labor reform prisoner, regardless of the size of the crime. Of course, this was a judgment for ordinary people. For nobles, they could propose a trial by combat for major crimes, to get rid of the crime, and for minor crimes, they could completely be exempted from punishment by paying a fine. The treatment in all aspects was simply a world of difference compared to ordinary civilians. For Renly, his main task is to read the trial records left by his predecessor or his predecessor, and then give advice, based on these experiences, when King Robert holds the trial, but it is not certain whether the king will listen to these. In other words, how to rebel depends on the king's mood and thoughts at the time. In short, the job of the Minister of Justice is very easy. But easy does not mean unimportant. As one of the 7 members of the Royal Council, the Minister of Justice is a core minister of the kingdom. He can participate in various important political decisions, and can also learn about the situation in various parts of the kingdom at the first time. For example, half a month after the banquet, Renly was officially appointed as the Minister of Justice. He heard something that interested him. Duke Tully believes that the death of Lord Walder of the twins is not simple. In the Royal Council Hall, at the long conference table, the bald fat man in a pink robe sitting near the king said he believes that the death of Lord Walder is related to the increasingly serious wolf problem in the Riverlands. Chapter 234 The Problem of the Church. Varys, the chief of intelligence, was a eunuch, and he always spoke softly, but there were only 7 people at the royal conference table, and no one could hear clearly when they gathered together. At this time, the person sitting at the head was King Robert. Because he disliked the golden hair that was very annoying, and suspected that there might be some witchcraft power in it, he shaved his head directly. The bald forehead was in contrast with Varys next to him. Does he still think that those wolves can run into the twins and bite old Free to death? After listening to Varys' words, the bald king said in a muffled voice, or did old Free, who had difficulty walking, suddenly want to go out for a walk, and ended up being attacked by those wolves? Robert suddenly caught a cold these 2 days. His nose was blocked, and his voice sounded strange, and he regarded this as one of the signs of being infected. We have no way of knowing the details, Your Majesty. Varys replied softly. Lord Tully is investigating the matter. Robert waved his hand with no interest, so Varys shut his mouth. On the other side, Duke Mace took the opportunity to say, the envoy of the Iron Bank of Bravos has come to collect the debt. Your Majesty, do you want to meet him? Just let you, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, do you want to do it? Robert said without hesitation, and without waiting for Duke Mace to respond, he continued to say to Varys, speed up the investigation to see if Bravos is really colluding with the Targaryens. I look forward to settling the accounts with them carefully. We currently only know that the remnants of the Targaryens once lived in Bravos for a few years. Varys said, but this is not enough to constitute evidence that they have reached a cooperation. Then continue the investigation. Robert ordered. Dawn replied that they could send envoys to discuss the marriage, Your Majesty. The Prime Minister Jon Arryn said at this time, they seem to be very sincere. Hearing this, the bold king glanced at the black-haired young man who was listening silently at the end of the long table, and said, then let them come. I want to see whether those Dornish people are really sincere or they are up to something. The Prime Minister nodded and then said, Earl Gerald Grafson of Gulltown will arrive in King's Landing tomorrow, Your Majesty. You go to contact him first, and let him come to see me when you think there is no problem. Robert replied. Renly, who had been listening silently, suddenly said, I hope to be with Prime Minister Jon, Your Majesty. As the accuser, I think he should want to see me. Robert looked at the bald old man, and saw that he did not express his opinion, and said to Renly, you and Jon will go to see him directly tomorrow. Renly nodded and said nothing more. Afterwards, the meeting continued, and the people at the table talked about many things related to the Seven Kingdoms, but only two of them could attract Renly. The so-called wolf plague mentioned earlier was one, and the church-related one mentioned later was another. In the past 2 years, there have been rumors of wild wolves attacking peasant knights in the Riverlands, mainly concentrated in the area of the Free Family's territory and the Twins, and it seems to be quite serious. Renly knew about this before, but due to his relatively simple intelligence system, he didn't know the details. When he heard it, he knew that the cunning old Marquis of the Twins had died. This surprised him, because he had a deep impression of the cunning old man who could still marry a concubine in his 70s and 80s, but there were not many clues about his death, so he didn't think much about it. Relatively speaking, the matter of the church mentioned at the royal meeting table made him more concerned. Even the people of King's Landing have learned that the remnants of the Targaryen want to use the pagan forces to counterattack the Iron Throne, but the High Septon pretends to be unaware. Your Majesty, I think we need to talk to the High Septon. That fat man is greedy by nature. Maybe he wants some benefits from us. This matter is not just about the Iron Throne. What reason does he have to ask for benefits? Maybe he thinks that foreign pagans will not impact the status of the church. Obviously, the cooperation between Renly and Meager has begun to bear fruit, but it seems that the effect is not strong. After listening silently for a while, Renly couldn't help but think of the deal that had not yet been reached with the 7 gods on his wrist. So when the meeting ended, he directly left the Red Castle with a team of guards and headed towards the steel street of King's Landing. The sound of horse hooves hitting the ground was crisp and loud. The team of 10 people riding horses was not very eye-catching, but it also made many pedestrians on the road avoid them. Renly, who was leading the way, was wearing a dark blue velvet top with gold edges and slim breeches. His short black hair was neat and shiny. His handsome face was still childish when he looked closely. He looked more like a dandy boy than a minister of the kingdom. After arriving in King's Landing for more than half a month, Renly basically did not step out of the Red Keep, so no one could recognize him, let alone the personnel appointments in the Red Keep. However, as he walked forward, Renly could still feel that some eyes were staring at him. He didn't care about it. King's Landing is not like the Reach. The forces of all parties are complicated. It is normal to have many spies in secret. It's just that it's normal, but Renly can't let them stare at him all the time, and he also has the ability to feel who these people are who are paying attention to his existence. So after walking for a while, he called the guards beside him and whispered a few words to them. The guards turned their horses around and approached some special people in the crowd. My lord, would you like to listen to a song? One of them, a man with a mustache disguised as a sloppy bard, smiled guiltily at a sturdy guard approaching him. As a result, a whip hit him directly, making him cover his face and wail. At the same time, several screams suddenly sounded around him, attracting the attention of many people on the street. However, the guards ignored the gazes of these people and continued to whip them with whips in their hands until the targets lay on the ground, rolling and wailing, not daring to get up. Then they turned around to protect Renly as he rode away, so there was no more spies watching them. This behavior caused many people who did not know the situation to be filled with indignation, and also caused some people who knew the situation to be secretly astonished, but the person concerned did not take it to heart. After taking the guards to walk around King's Landing seemingly casually, he went back to the Red Castle directly, as if he was just going out for a casual stroll. However, in fact, Renly was contacting his own people in the city. He had limited manpower, and he only brought 20 guards from Dragonstone to King's Landing from Dragonstone. However, this does not mean that Renly has no other manpower available in King's Landing, the capital of the Seven Kingdoms. In fact, the intelligence system he has created in the past 9 years is mainly concentrated in this city. Westeros is very large and the transportation is inconvenient. It is very difficult to create an intelligence system with a wide coverage, but it is much simpler to focus on the capital of the Seven Kingdoms. In the past 10 years of frugality and active participation in the tournaments, held in various places in the River Bay, Renly's money has basically been spent in the city of King's Landing. It is not said how strong the effect will be, but at least it is not a problem for him to understand the situation of some people in King's Landing, and the forces of all parties. So on the evening, after returning to the Red Keep, some information about the church was placed directly on the desk in Renly's bedroom. Chapter 235 Capital City Garrison. The Archbishop of the Church has no name, because the doctrine of the Church of the Seven Gods stipulates that the Archbishop must give up his original name when he takes office, because the servants of God do not need a name. However, the people of King's Landing still have a more intimate name for the current Archbishop, the Fat Archbishop. Obviously, Fat is not a normal name for a Archbishop, or in other words, it is not a name that a respectable Archbishop would have. From this nickname, we can roughly see how famous this person is in King's Landing. Flipping through the information on the table, constantly scanning the lines of common language fonts on the paper that are not neat but recognizable, Renly has a clearer understanding of the situation of the Fat Archbishop. Greedy and corrupt, gluttonous, conservative, bureaucratic. Background, some things he has done after becoming the Archbishop, current address, etc. The information on the table is very comprehensive. After reading it, Renly believes that there is a reason why the first transaction goal proposed by the Seven Gods to him is to replace the Archbishop. According to his standards, this person is not a bad person, but if you look at the entire Church of the Seven, then this person's existence is simply a drag. The High Bishop has a close relationship with King Robert, my lord. We need to be cautious if we want to touch him. The White Deer Winder, who was wearing a linen cloak and dressed in an inconspicuous manner in front of the desk, said so after seeing Renly put down the information. This middle-aged woman had met Renly in the Reach a few months ago, but then she returned directly to King's Landing. At this time, the blonde Winder was no different from before, but Renly could find that she walked more lightly, was in a full mental state, and had very sharp eyes. Obviously, the power seed that Renly once gave her has been taking effect in her body, constantly transforming her in the direction of the extraordinary. If I really want to touch him, I won't let Robert find out. Renly answered the other party's advice casually, but in his heart he was thinking about how to replace this High Bishop. This is not only because of the deal with the Seven Gods, but also about whether this invisible helper of the church can be used by Baratheon. The Archbishop of the church is elected by the Archbishops. Once in office, he is basically a lifetime position. Unless he makes a big mistake, he will not be removed. However, Renly does not think this is a big problem. There are many ways to get rid of the Archbishop. The simplest one is to kill him directly. But the problem is, even if the position of Archbishop is vacant, who should be found to succeed? In addition to the Archbishop, there is some information about several other Archbishops in the data. In Renly's opinion, these people are the same as the Fat Archbishop. They are either corrupt, stubborn, and conservative, or vain. They are not suitable candidates at all. Some are even worse than this Archbishop. Renly has a headache about this. He doesn't know much about the current church. In his previous life, there seems to be a monk named Big Sparrow who is more capable, but there is no record of it in the data, and even the name of Sparrow has never appeared. Maybe this is another completely different situation from that drama, or maybe this Big Sparrow is not called Big Sparrow yet. Renly did not think much about it, but asked Winder to pay attention to whether there are any monks in the church who are outstanding and can win the support of the people. Then he thought of his position as the Minister of Justice, so he gave an order. Investigate the managers of the city guard again, especially the commander of the guard, Janus Slimed. I need to know what he has done since he took office, his personality and background, etc. White Deer Winder nodded. Renly did not have anything else to tell her, so he sent a guard to take her away from the Red Castle. After becoming the Minister of Justice, Renly had the power to bring people in and out of this royal fortress, as long as the number was not too large. The room became quiet, and Renly, sitting behind the desk, continued to think about the problem of the city guard. The city guard is a security management level of King's Landing, equivalent to a position like the police. In theory, it is under the jurisdiction of him, the Minister of Justice, but the garrison has been directly under the command of the royal family in recent years. Renly had asked his cheap elder brother before, and the other party bluntly said that he could interfere with the daily work and personnel appointments of the garrison, but he could not cause any chaos. So Renly needed to understand the current details of this group. After all, the capital garrison had more than 5,000 people in King's Landing. This was the largest armed force in King's Landing. If he could really control it, Renly believed that, even if the situation in King's Landing was complicated and changeable, he would be able to remain invincible. Unfortunately, some news that came back later made Renly's idea of completely controlling the capital garrison disappear. Drunkards, hooligans, this is the largest group in the garrison. They usually eat and wait for death, and eat empty salaries. They rely on their status as members of the garrison to bully others in King's Landing. They are equivalent to a group of straw bags. It is useless to win them over, but it may bring trouble. In addition to this type of people, private soldiers from large and small families are another important component of the garrison. They are nominally loyal to the royal family, but in fact they obey their respective lords. In other words, the more private soldiers the lords place in the garrison, the greater their influence in King's Landing. The Tyrells, the Arryns, and some of the lords serving in King's Landing, big and small. These private soldiers are indeed elite, but it is impossible for Renly to control them. These are not all the complex structures of the capital's garrison. In this huge armed force, there are also some forces supported by wealthy businessmen, officials from various departments, and even underground gangs in the city. It is complicated and a mess. Under normal circumstances, an armed force directly under the royal family cannot be infiltrated so seriously, so Renly thinks this situation is completely abnormal, and he also clearly understands the root of this abnormality. Janis Slynt, the commander of the capital's garrison who is famous for taking bribes and buying and selling official positions. Renly can't understand why such a person can become the commander of the garrison, and he doesn't understand why his cheap elder brother would let such a person sit in the important position of the garrison commander for 10 years, but these are not important for the time being. He was going to talk to this butcher, but before that, Renly had to do another thing. He had planned that the Lord of Gulltown, Gerald Grafson, had arrived in King's Landing. Chapter 236 Special Channel. The Grafson family in the valley is powerful. Gulltown, which they control, is one of the 5 major cities in Westeros. The wealth every year or even every day is a huge figure, far beyond the ordinary lords, who rely on land cultivation for profit. Although the family's strength was damaged during Robert's rebellion, because they stood on the wrong side, Gulltown, as the foundation of the family, is still in their hands. So although the power is no longer as strong as it used to be, it can still be called a local lord. As the head of the Grafson family, Gerald Grafson has reason to believe that even the king can't do anything to him easily, so despite his hesitation, he still decided to come here, after receiving the call from King's Landing to prove his innocence. However, not long after arriving in King's Landing, he gradually felt like he had fallen into the mouth of a wolf. After arriving, he came into contact with Lord Jon Arryn, the feudal lord, and Gerald Grafson did not have much, or for the bald old man. Although the Duke of Arryn was brave and wise in his youth, his aging made him more and more cowardly. At the same time, the frailty of his heir also made the old Duke a little worried about dealing with many matters related to his vassals. So let alone not saying that there is no handle, Earl Gerald Grafson believes that, even if he really has some handle in the hands of the other party, he is confident that he will not be punished. But he did not expect that the black-haired young man who met him with the old duke would be so difficult. As the new royal children after the change of dynasty, the 3 Baratheon brothers are well known in the 7 kingdoms. The eldest brother Robert Baratheon is generous and magnanimous, good at fighting, and has a kingly demeanor. The second son Stannis Baratheon is stubborn, mean, old-fashioned and ruthless. And the youngest Renly has also begun to emerge in recent times, stirring up a lot of turmoil in the River Bay, and many lords in the valley have talked about it. However, because of the letter, Lord Gerald Grafson had a very bad impression of the Duke of Dragonstone. He thought that the young Duke was arrogant and self-righteous, and he also held grudges. He also thought that, although such a person was very capable, he was too aggressive, did not know how to restrain himself, did not talk about flexibility and affection, and would be frustrated sooner or later. However, after just a few words, Lord Gerald Grafson's impression of him was completely changed. You are sure that we can't do anything to you, because we can't have any evidence, but you did have contact with Targaryen's people. You know this yourself, and we know it too. Evidence? The evidence is the man with a scar on his face. Do you know who I'm talking about? That's right, the man Targaryen sent to contact you. You didn't agree to them. I know you didn't, but you didn't refuse either. In just a few words, the powerful Lord of Seagull Town was frightened and sweating profusely. At the same time, his response was quite flustered, and it was obvious that he was touched. Jon Arryn, who was standing by, watched all this quietly, and was inevitably surprised. At first, he was a little dissatisfied with the young Lord Justices taking over the show, but now he simply stood aside and listened attentively. Seeing Gerald Grafson, a vassal who used to be undisciplined, become more and more honest, he felt a little complicated. He was getting older and older, and he didn't know how many years he could live. His only son was only 3 years old, and had a strange disease. He would have epilepsy at the slightest stimulation, and his body was extremely weak. It was unknown whether he could grow up to adulthood. In this situation, Jon knew very well that the vassal of the Vale no longer had the same awe for him as before, and he also knew that many lords of the Vale had already placed their treasures on a collateral descendant of the Arryn family besides his son. This could be clearly felt from the perfunctory attitude of some people in the past, and Jon had always been helpless about it. The Arryn family was an ancient and honorable family, but in his generation, the number of people was so small. So when he saw the accusatory letter from Dragonstone a while ago, he was not angry, because Renly rashly interfered in the affairs of the Vale, because the Arryn family, or his rule over the Vale, was indeed not so stable. 300 years ago, the Targaryens invaded Westeros for the first time, creating 4 major feudal families: the Baratheons of the Stormlands, the Tyrells of the Reach, the Tullys of the Riverlands, and the Greyjoys of the Iron Islands. So, will this second invasion that has surfaced also give birth to a new ruling class, with the opportunity to reshuffle, who would be willing to be a younger brother and pay taxes every year and every month? Although he agreed with Renly's plan, Jon did not think that this matter would achieve any results. At most, it would just attract the Earl of Seagull Town to give them a warning. They did not have any evidence, and everything was just speculation. What other possibilities could there be? But now, slander? Do you still think I'm slandering you? Do you really think so? There's no point in quibbling. You and I know the facts. But don't worry, you didn't promise Targaryen. How could we hold you accountable? What does His Majesty think? His Majesty is famous for his magnanimous temperament. As long as you are sincere and swear not to have any other thoughts, I believe he will not hold you accountable. How do I know? I naturally have my own information channels to understand all this, but rest assured, my lord, as long as you have no ulterior motives, then this will not do you any harm. The middle-aged nobleman with a mustache kept wiping the cold sweat on his face. He no longer had the confidence and determination he had when he came. Instead, his heart was filled with guilt and awe. When will His Majesty summon me? I can't wait to see His Majesty. The loyalty of the Grayson family needs to be demonstrated immediately. I know several lords who have also had contact with Targaryen. Yes, I know a lot of secrets, and I want to tell His Majesty these in person. Renly smiled when he heard this, and looked at the Bull Duke beside him. Go and have a good sleep first. His Majesty will summon you in the evening. The old man replied, so the middle-aged noble standing in the middle of the hall bowed, and then walked out of the door in a hurry. At this time, they were still in the Red Castle, but not the throne room, but a deserted side hall. After the Earl of Seagull Town was taken away by the guards, only Renly and Duke John were left in the hall. The bold old man then looked at the black-haired young man. Does Lord Renly really have such a powerful channel to know all this? Of course. Renly replied, otherwise, how can I explain how I know those things? The old man didn't know what to say when he heard this. The appearance of the person he had contacted, what he had said, the time and place. He had heard all the questions he had asked before. How much time and what kind of people did he have to plant to get such a clear understanding of the other party? Or, how much effort did he have to spend to find out? Admiration, fear, shock, surprise. He felt incredible, but the facts were right in front of him. However, if this was true, it would not be a smart move to expose this channel so easily. Jero Grafson will definitely clean up the people around him when he returns. After calming down, the old man reminded Renly. It doesn't matter. Renly waved his hand. Earl Grafson has made the right choice. It is not a smart move to trust others so easily. The old man wanted to say this, but seeing Renly's confident look, he opened his mouth, but didn't say much. Instead, after a moment of silence, he suddenly mentioned another topic. What do you think about how to attack the Crabclaw Peninsula? Thank you to book friend Xianatang 246 for the 200 reward, and thank you to book friend Kangshan Fuxuis Beitao, book friend Roy Wufeng and book friend 201902200959937361 for the 100 reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 237 Reward Plan. The Crabclaw Peninsula must be attacked as the first traitor to escape and openly violate the Iron Throne's decree. But how to fight is a problem. The Crabclaw Peninsula is called a peninsula because one end of it is connected to the Westeros continent, but the territory extends into the ocean. The special environment makes the peninsula's geography very unique. Mountains and swamps run parallel, forests cover a large area, barren and sparsely populated. The Crabclaw Peninsula is not strong, but it is very difficult to attack. In thousands of years of history, the Crabclaw Peninsula has never been broken by anyone, whether it is the oldest Andal invasion era or the era of hundreds of countries coexisting. It was not until the conqueror Aegon came to Westeros that the people of the peninsula out and surrendered when they saw the situation was not good, but the reason for their surrender was the dragon, rather than anything else. However, Baratheon has no dragons. The Crabclaw Peninsula is full of open and dark swamps. It will inevitably cost a lot to attack it by force. Bald Lord Jon Arryn said to Renly, but we can't let it continue to exist. He shook his head as he spoke. Renly knew a little about this. Although he had only participated in the Royal Council once, he had heard a lot of rumors during his stay in the Red Castle. In fact, attacking the Crabclaw Peninsula would be very cost effective, because even if it was conquered, it would be useless. It was a forest wasteland with a small population, and no resources worth mentioning. The fact that the Iron Throne had left it there for more than 10 years without asking about it showed how little attention that place had received. But now that things had come to this, they had to fight, even if they didn't want to. I don't know much about military operations. After thinking for a while, Renly said, but maybe we can start from other aspects. Other aspects? The old Prime Minister asked. Which aspects? How many people are there in Crabclaw Peninsula? Renly did not answer immediately, but asked a seemingly unrelated question. We have no way of knowing this. Old Jon replied, the people of the peninsula in the Targaryen era never paid taxes. I'm afraid they themselves don't know how many people they have. Can it be more than 10,000 people? It's impossible to have as many as 10,000 people. Old Jon shook his head. Let's assume there are 10,000 of them. Renly said, we'll offer a reward of 10,000 gold dragons for these 10,000 people. 1 gold dragon for each head. Lord Jon, what do you think of this solution? This? The old man was stunned when he heard this, and then fell into deep thought. The civilian armed forces in Westeros are huge, but those hired knights, riders, and mercenaries are all very poor. There are no job opportunities in non-war periods. Many of them can't even afford to sleep in a hotel. Being able to sleep on the floor of a stable is already a relatively good treatment. So let alone a gold dragon per head, even a silver moon per head is very attractive to those people. Think back to more than 200 years ago, the famous tyrant Meager Targaryen of the Targaryen dynasty offered a reward of only one gold dragon for the Knights of the Sons of Warriors. This kind of reward is generous. If it is really announced, it will inevitably attract civilian armed personnel from the entire Westeros continent to flock to it. If you think about it carefully, these scattered people can just target the special environment of the Crabclaw Peninsula. The Crabclaw Peninsula is full of natural traps, which is very disadvantageous for a large-scale army to attack. However, if a group of 3 or 5, or 1 or 2 mercenaries break in, the environmental restrictions of the peninsula will not be so great. Jon Arryn even thought of more. Are there really 10,000 people on the peninsula? Even if there are 10,000 people, can they persist until the last person dies and not surrender? 1 gold royal for ordinary civilians, 10 or dozens for small nobles, and 100 or even hundreds for lords. Renly saw the old prime minister bowing his head in thought, and added, at the same time, we can spread the news that the locals of the peninsula can also accept this reward. This is to let them fight among themselves. The old man was more excited after hearing this, but he had some concerns. But how can we identify the identity of the bounty offering person? The identity of the lord class is relatively easy to identify, but it is not easy for ordinary people. Renly thought for a while and said, but we can make plans for the mercenaries who come to accept the bounty, such as leaving a little mark on their face or ears, piercing their ears, etc., so that we don't have to worry about them killing each other to pretend to receive the bounty. At the same time, if we really want to do this, we must block the Crabclaw Peninsula and only allow entry but not exit, so as to prevent the mercenaries from running to other places to kill innocent people. Maybe the people of Crabclaw Peninsula will hide, or gather together to resist? If the bounty is calculated, based on the number of people, our bounty can continue to exist, but the people of the peninsula cannot always gather together. They need to farm, fish, eat, drink, defecate and urinate. Obviously, the old prime minister was quite tempted by this proposal, but Renly could see that he had concerns, as if he thought this method was too violent and full of blood behind it. Renly did not comment on this, because this trick was indeed not very decent, so he did not persuade them much. After a brief chat, he said goodbye and left. In Renly's view, the Crabclaw Peninsula incident was not a big deal at all. It didn't matter whether he could win or not. Relatively speaking, he was more concerned about the situation in Westeros as a whole. Lord Greatson of Gulltown claimed that he would reveal some families in the Vale that were connected to the Targaryens. After that, there would inevitably be a move to kill the chicken to scare the monkey. Renly thought this was an opportunity and even thought about whether he could use it to completely solve the Vale issue. As long as the Vale was handled well, then in the Seven Kingdoms, apart from Dorne, only the Riverlands would not be very stable. Maybe the Iron Islands should be included? Thinking of this, Renly, who was walking towards the throne room, frowned unconsciously. 10 years ago, he and the King of the Iron Islands had discussed many ways out for the Iron Islands, such as shipping, trade, deepening the connection with the Westeros continent, and being a sea coachman. The profits from marine trade were huge. More than 100 years ago, the Valerian family under Renly once used the speculation between the continents to become the richest man in Westeros. There are more than 30 islands in the Iron Islands. If they work together to develop here, it cannot be said that they will be the same as the Valerian in the past, but it is better than being a low-class robber. It is not that the money is better, but that the so-called ancient road is outdated. Unfortunately, it is not clear whether it is due to the influence of the ancient road seed or the original temperament. Although the leader Greyjoy has developed long-distance trade in recent years, he has not paid much attention to it. He always wants to restore the ancient road and lead the Iron Islands to burn, kill and plunder. Because the ancient road mark can read minds, Renly knows this very well. He thinks that Greyjoy is not an honest man, and he is not loyal at all. If it is really profitable, he will stand on the side of Targaryen in a minute. Thinking of this, Renly's footsteps suddenly stopped. Why don't I see the son Greyjoy sent as a hostage? After the defeat, Greyjoy lost two sons. One was sent to King's Landing as a hostage, and the other was sent to the north as an adopted son. He has been in King's Landing for quite some time, so why haven't I heard any news about the son, who was a hostage? Renly was a little puzzled about this, and decided to ask later. However, before he reached the throne room, he saw a person on the way, which made him think, and narrow his eyes unconsciously. He seemed to have seen the commander of the Capital Guard named Janos Slynt. There are only 2 chapters today, a bit stuck. Chapter 238 Janos Slynt. Bald head, double chin, narrow features, looks a bit like a frog, not tall, short and fat, looks like a barrel. The commander of the capital garrison, Janos Slynt, who nominally controls more than 5,000 people, looks just like his reputation, ugly, and doesn't look like a good person at first glance. Renly had never seen him before, but the golden robe on the other party was very recognizable. He went up to ask, and directly confirmed his identity. Renly didn't have a good impression of this person when they first met. It was not because he judged people by appearance, nor was it because of the information he had learned in the past, but because the commander of the garrison had a smooth temperament and was slightly arrogant. "We have never had enough manpower, my lord. King's Landing is too big, and there are too many people. There are always outsiders running in. We can't handle it with just the number of people we have. Some mobs are really dishonest, and some even dare to attack us openly, so we must recruit more people. Lord Mace is in charge of finances, but he has never supported us to recruit more people. If you have time, please help us to make peace. After all, the security of King's Landing is a big deal." Work status? The work status is just so-so. We mainly focus on Steel Street and Silk Street. After all, the big guys prefer those places. Flea Bottom? We also have people patrolling Flea Bottom, but there is usually nothing to manage there, so it is not our focus. Of course, Lord Renly, don't worry, we will of course obey your orders. You can tell us if there is anything. Serving the royal family is our responsibility. When talking to him, the guy's words were warm and honest on the surface, but Renly could clearly feel the perfunctory and indifferent attitude of the short fat frog-faced man standing in front of him. When he asked about the composition of the garrison, he even showed a hint of displeasure, as if he had already regarded the Capital Watch as his own backyard to make money, and it was obvious that he did not take Renly, his direct superior, seriously. This made Renly's already bad impression of him even worse, so after saying goodbye to him, he secretly made a decision. In fact, just as Renly felt, Janos Slynt did not take Renly, the new Minister of Justice, seriously. Although Renly had a loud name recently, and was said to have unusual means, that could not affect the Capital Watch organization after all. The composition of the garrison's internal members is complex and intricate. While allowing this armed force to be infiltrated by major organizations, Janos Slynt himself has reached a certain degree of tacit understanding with various forces in King's Landing. In other words, although he was born in a humble family, he had many powers behind him, and had friendships with many big men. Anyone who wanted to move him had to think twice. So although he knew that His Majesty the King had delegated the management of the garrison to the newly promoted Minister of Justice, and although he felt that the young boss was dissatisfied with him, Janos Slynt did not care. No matter how outstanding your ability is, since you have entered this circle, you have to act according to the rules of this circle. If you rashly break the rules, you will only be hostile and backlashed by everyone. As the commander of the garrison, Janos Slynt no longer needs to take the initiative to surrender to anyone, or curry favor with anyone. On the contrary, he is the object of competition among major forces. So he thought that when this sharp young boss saw the situation clearly, he would also try to win him over, because that was the rule of the game. If you didn't follow the rules, you wouldn't be able to accomplish anything. He even began to think about what kind of request he should make when Renly tried to win him over. Although he had no shortage of money, the more the better. However, he heard that the territory of this Duke Renly was just a ruined island, and there was no money to speak of. Being in Janos Slynt's position, he had basically climbed to the top. Going up would mean being awarded the status of a noble in the territory, but this was not something the Lord of Justice could give. So after thinking about it, he thought that the only benefit he could get from him was to expand the team. That kid is in charge of the garrison for the first time, so he naturally needs to support his own strength. Janos Slynt thought as he walked out of the Red Castle, after reporting to the Iron Throne. I can use this to recruit more of my own people. Besides, the salary of the city guard has not changed for many years. It's time to change it. Since he wants to be the boss, he should win people's hearts. Encourage him to negotiate with that stingy fat man Mace. While secretly thinking of a trick, Janos Slynt stepped out of the Red Castle gate. The gatekeepers on both sides greeted him, and he responded with a perfunctory wave of his hand. A team of city guard members who stayed outside the gate hurriedly surrounded their boss after seeing him come out. After asking a few flattering questions, they surrounded the short and fat commander in a golden mail robe and headed towards the depths of the city. Although the team of more than 10 people was not large, they all wore the same golden robe and rode their horses with high spirits, which was very impressive. However, there was a commotion in the team soon after, because Commander Janos Slynt, who was leading the team on horseback, was scratched on the face by a black eagle that fell from the sky. The garrison members were shocked when he fell off his horse and wailed. Then they rushed forward to help and support him, and turned their horses back to the Red Castle to find the Grand Maester for treatment. After a lot of chaos, the lackeys finally sent their boss to the Maester's tower. However, when the white-bearded old Maester opened Janos Slynt's hands that had been covering his face and was about to check the injury, he suddenly found that under the tightly closed eyelids, there were 2 holes. Why can't I see? Janos Slynt, who felt a sharp pain on his face, had never noticed this before, but when he opened his eyes, it was dark, which made him very confused. However, no one in the room answered his question. The startled Grand Maester opened his mouth and stammered, not knowing how to start. At the same time, the lackeys who had accompanied Janos Slynt here were looking at each other, and finally looked at the boss on the bedboard who had been sent here by them with a nervous face before, and their eyes were different. In the tower room on the other side of the Red Castle, Renly sat quietly in a chair in front of the window, his ice blue eyes deep and magnificent, staring at some scenes outside the tower in a daze, as if thinking about something. The sky outside the room was cloudless, and a black eagle with its wings spread flew by at high speed, bringing a melodious eagle cry, and also threw away the 2 spherical bloody objects in its claws at random, and smashed them on the rock wall of a tower in the Red Castle like garbage, turning them into a pool of shattered pieces, and at the same time, shattered someone's greed and future. Thank you Kakazira Pangsi book friend for the 1000 rewards, and thank you Tawasinrin book friend for the 100 rewards. Chapter 239 Personnel Selection Issue. The fact that the commander of the capital's garrison, Janos Slynt, was attacked by an eagle and subsequently became blind could not be concealed at all. That night, the news had spread among the noble circles and wealthy businessmen of King's Landing. Obviously, being attacked by an eagle is a rare situation, especially in the city, so many people talked about it. As soon as the news came out, most people responded with surprise, thinking that the guy was really unlucky, but no one could guess that this matter was not simple. In other words, even if they guessed it, it was far from the truth. It must be the blessing of the gods in heaven that Janos Slynt, who deserves to go to the 7 levels of hell, was punished. Some people who had suffered losses felt relieved by this, and this attitude became a mainstream after the news spread to the entire civilian class of King's Landing. The commander of the garrison does not do his job, but thinks about how to embezzle money all day long, and also stuffs some drunkards into the garrison. This irresponsible situation is obviously impossible to be respected by the people, not to mention that Janos Slynt himself is not a good person. In addition, the internal personnel of the garrison are also full of gloating about his experience. Those who were accepted by him to live a lazy life, or from various forces were not sent in for nothing. They not only need to bribe, but also the salary paid to them by the Iron Throne will be continuously drawn afterwards. At the same time, the vacant commander position made many people jealous, so the young Minister of Justice, who was not valued in this regard, has become a hot commodity in recent times. The capital garrison is responsible for maintaining the security of King's Landing. The position of the commander of the garrison naturally needs to be carefully considered. Lord Renly, do you have a suitable candidate? After another meeting in front of the king, Varys, the chief intelligence officer in a pink robe, came close to ask. Since Renly became the Minister of Justice, this bold eunuch nicknamed the Octopus Spider has been constantly showing goodwill to Renly, so Renly can often hear some hidden things from him. To be honest, if it weren't for his special psychic talent, Renly would not have been wary of this guy, but now, he just feels that this guy is very mysterious. There is no suitable candidate yet, and we are screening. Renly answered as he walked. This is the truth. In peacetime, if you want to support someone to be the commander of the garrison, it is naturally impossible to send a stranger to parachute in directly. You can only choose from the original garrison officers. However, it is not easy to choose the right person from the intricate mess. I wonder if Lord Renly has heard of Jocelyn Bywater? The pink eunuch asked beside him. The new captain of the Mudgate? Yes, I think he is a very good candidate. Varys said sincerely. Renly looked at him and was surprised when he heard it. Many people came to visit him these past 2 days, all for the purpose of the position of the commander of the capital garrison, but none of those visitors were so straight to the point. For example, Lord Mace Tyrell, who is currently the Minister of Finance, talked for a long time about Renly's life as an adopted son in Highgarden, how much he thinks of Renly, and how the two sides are natural allies, before talking about the business. Finally, he seemed to mention a suitable candidate from the local area. However, local origin does not mean that one is a member of the local power. After a little investigation, Renly directly learned that the candidate was actually the representative of a power supported by Lord Tyrell and the garrison. Jocelyn Bywater has participated in the war against the Iron Islands. In comparison, he is more suitable than those who have not made any contributions. Renly replied to the pink eunuch, but the position of the commander of the capital garrison is very important. I need to consider it carefully. Of course. Varys smiled when he heard it. I just think Jocelyn Bywater is more suitable. If you don't have other suitable candidates, you can investigate him more. Then the fat man didn't say much. After chatting for a few words, he said goodbye and left. Renly continued to walk towards his office. As one of the important ministers of the country, the Lord Justice naturally cannot be without a corresponding office. In fact, Renly has an entire tower in the Red Castle as his office. It is a high tower connected to the Red Castle dungeon. In addition to several assistants and clerks, there are also some jailers guarding the dungeon. Compared to the unregulated organization of the city guard, the Red Castle dungeon managed by the Minister of Justice was taken over smoothly by Renly without any obstacles. After all, the dungeon and the prisoners were not important matters. In the current era, there was no punishment of depriving criminals of their personal freedom and detaining them in prison for a long time. Except for the nobles or some important personnel, no one would be idle to take in ordinary civilians in the prison for free. The prison staff was not actually directly under Renly's jurisdiction, but was managed by the royal law enforcer, or the king's exclusive executioner. However, the current royal law enforcer was an old man whose tongue was pulled out by the Mad King of the previous dynasty. He could not manage others at all, so Renly, the immediate superior, was directly responsible for the prison director and the jailers. After entering the tower, some jailers who were chatting on the first floor greeted him one after another. After nodding in response several times, Renly walked up the stairs to the tower. Regarding the position of the garrison commander, Renly actually didn't have a suitable person to place in his position, because the capital garrison at that time was a complete mess. The capable people were all from other forces, and he looked down on the incapable. Under normal circumstances, Renly's choice for this position was to ally with a certain force, and he couldn't place his own people, because he didn't have any of his own people available. But now there is an abnormal situation. After entering the office, a short-haired middle-aged man who had been waiting for a long time looked over. When he saw Renly nodded to him, he walked over and bowed. Lord Renly. Samwell Tully, nicknamed Barbarian. Renly asked back. Your Excellency can call me Sam. The other party replied. I have a squire with the same name as you. Renly smiled at him, then walked to the desk and sat down, and motioned the other party to sit down and talk. I've seen that little fat guy. The sturdy middle-aged man with dark brown hair and beard sat obediently opposite the desk, with a slight smile on his lips. Didn't your lord bring him to King's Landing? He stayed in Dragonstone for the time being and will come to King's Landing in 2 days. Renly said, glancing at the other person wearing the golden robe and chainmail unique to the Capital Guard, and couldn't help but say, "You are really creative. You can even think of infiltrating the guard. This is one of our few options." Samwell from more than 200 years ago replied, "For us, Janus Slynt, who is paid to do things, is a good man. Let me guess, there won't be your people in the Great Wall in the north. We are indeed interested in the position of the Commander-in-Chief of the Night's Watch on the Great Wall," Samwell said frankly. Renly shrugged when he heard it. The man in front of him was one of the ancients of Migo's group. He had joined the Capital Guard a few years ago, and now he has become the captain of the Lion Gate, one of the 7 gates of King's Landing, and he also has a certain number of people available. Renly was going to promote this ancient man to be the commander of the garrison. This choice was not the most perfect, but it was the most suitable one for Renly. However, he did not call this man here to test him. In fact, Renly had secretly tested him with the moment of psychic communication. He called him here for another important matter. "I hope your people can go to the Free Family territory in the Riverlands for me." After chatting for a while, Renly said, "Find out what happened there. I will resume updating tomorrow." Chapter 240 Severe Punishment. Although the change of the commander of the capital garrison caused a slight turmoil in King's Landing, it was not a big deal in Westeros. The big news in the 7 Kingdoms recently was the Free Family in the Riverlands. The Free Family, one of the most powerful families in the Riverlands, was now dead in name only. In other words, the Twins, where the Free Family lived, was now deserted and completely abandoned, and no one from the Free Family had ever shown up again. The news came from the seafront, the closest city to the Twins, and the entire royal meeting was in an uproar because they had not heard any rumors before. In other words, the rumors they heard were just the unclear death of the old Lord Free, but they didn't expect that the second news was that the entire Free Family had disappeared. Why was this so? No one knew, and Renly didn't understand either, but he thought there must be something special happening. The Iron Throne could not get involved in this matter because they could not send people to investigate without the permission of the Tully family, the feudal lord of the Riverlands. But Renly himself did not have so many concerns, so he found this ancient man. Although they were not completely loyal to Renly, the ancient group at this time was basically tied to Renly, and they would naturally not refuse Renly's request. So when the new commander of the Capital Guard, Samwell, took office, a group of more than a dozen civilian investigators left the flea pit in the King's Landing slums in Twassen Threes and headed towards the Riverlands. A small chaos then broke out in King's Landing. The new garrison commander, Samwell, originally cooperated with a group of wool agents in the city, but when he took office, he quickly cut off relations with those merchants. This alone was not a big deal. At most the wool merchants were secretly annoyed by this, but then the new commander issued an order that quickly caused turmoil in the entire garrison team. The new commander decided to let all garrison members take turns for centralized training. As an organization similar to the combination of police and city defense soldiers, the members of the capital garrison naturally need time for training. But in the past, because they belonged to different forces, they had always been trained separately by their respective captains on their own turf. Now that they are gathered together, it is not clear whether there is any conspiracy in it. Just some things on the surface are enough to cause chaos. The complex composition of forces makes the garrison not a monolithic entity, and many even have hatreds with each other. At the same time, the result of unified training is the uniformity of training intensity, which is simply unbearable for most people who just want to get by. So on the day this order was executed, many people expressed dissatisfaction and resistance, and even turned around and left regardless of the order. In response, the new commander of the garrison, nicknamed the Barbarian, was not polite at all. All those who blatantly disobeyed orders were removed from the garrison, regardless of their power or number of people. This situation quickly caused a backlash. When the imperial meeting was held the next day, there were so many documents impeaching the new commander of the garrison that they piled up. Several important officials believed that the new commander of the garrison had been messing around since he took office and was extremely unqualified. They believed that he must be replaced. The loudest shouting belonged to the Minister of Finance Mace Tyrrell. However, Renly, who had kept a low profile since taking office, did not give this own man any face. He directly opened his mouth and retorted him back, even claiming without scruples that the garrison was no longer the king's garrison, but a group of ambitious people's garrison. As soon as these words came out, the atmosphere in the entire imperial meeting hall immediately became very strange. No one obviously expected Renly to say such a direct table-turning word, and even the king himself was very troubled by this. Obviously Robert was not unaware of this, or rather, as a dynasty established with the support of various forces, the Baratheon dynasty was obviously different from the previous Targaryen dynasty. However, Renly won in the end, because no matter what, it was a fact that those who were removed from the garrison openly disobeyed the orders of their superiors, and at the same time, the new commander's order for centralized training was not unreasonable. But he was not really victorious, because Renly then secretly contacted those who were dissatisfied with him, including some middle and high level officials, including wealthy businessmen in the city, and asked them to send people to fill their vacancies in the garrison. In this way, many of the tense relationships caused by this matter were eased, and the various forces no longer opposed the new commander's centralized training order. So this order basically gained a foothold in King's Landing. In addition to taking turns to guard their respective posts, the team of nearly 6,000 people also had to take turns to concentrate in several areas for training. Then, the real purpose of this order gradually emerged. High-intensity training is nothing for some elites, but for most of the idle idiots in the garrison, it is like the 7th level of hell. So after a few days of training, some people began to protest. However, with the last incident as a foundation, these people's protests did not receive any support. Or in other words, as long as Renly stopped touching the cake of various forces, no one would get involved in such things. After all, the facts have proved that the young Minister of Justice is a guy who is not easy to mess with. At the same time, most of the idle idiots actually have no one to support them, or at most, the support is some management class in the garrison, who are in cahoots with them. There are many such people, but for Renly, they can basically be ignored. However, he can ignore them, but the newly appointed barbarian Samwell cannot ignore their existence, or in other words, some people who have long been accustomed to the corrupt life in the past have already been disgusted with the new commander to the extreme. So on the way home, the barbarian was attacked by a large group of disguised personnel. Despite his great skills in the presence of many of his direct descendants, the man nicknamed the Barbarian was caught off guard and was seriously injured. If it weren't for his subordinates' desperate protection, he would not have seen the sun the next day. Once the incident occurred, it immediately shocked the entire royal council. This time, without Renly saying anything, King Robert was already furious. Later, with his support, Renly summoned all the management levels of the capital's garrison and personally took charge of the interrogation. This process lasted for a whole week. No one knew how the young Lord Justice interrogated, but the results afterwards made everyone tremble with fear. Under the onlookers of a large number of people in King's Landing, a full 137 conspirators were brutally hanged, and the densely packed corpses were hung on the walls of the Red Castle for 3 days and 3 nights for people to watch. Such a large-scale execution inevitably caused an uproar and doubts, but then when Renly produced sufficient witnesses and evidence, all doubts disappeared. Renly's reputation for cold-blooded cruelty spread throughout King's Landing. Some people hated him, while others worshipped him. However, no matter whether they hated him or worshipped him, everyone could not help but be in awe of him, or even fear him. Thank you to Destruction and Redemption and KINGHT for the 1000 yuan reward. Thank you to Xianatang 246 for the 200 yuan reward, and thank you to 201711022222258635 for the 100 yuan reward. Chapter 241 Peter. The sultry heat brought by the midsummer has been shrouding the entire King's Landing, making the city's already smelly air even more unpleasant. The climate in Westeros is irregular. The current summer has lasted for several years, and it is getting hotter as it lasts longer. As a result, people in the city have to run to the port area to blow the cool wind, or jump into the sea to take a bath during the hottest time of the day. There are more people blowing the cool wind, and there are actually very few people taking a bath, because the water source in the port area of King's Landing is very turbid and contains a lot of excrement. The large flow of people not only brings a certain degree of chaos, but also many additional products, such as the capital garrison, which is called the Golden Robe by the people, has a lot of supervisory personnel assigned here, and for example, many monks take the opportunity to preach doctrine here. Targaryens are born guilty. Now they have betrayed the gods in heaven, and the seven hells have left enough space for them. That's right, the gods in heaven have been watching all this, and we. A high-pitched and angry voice rang out among the crowd squatting on the ground, and countless eyes were focused. An old monk in a brown-grey robe was standing in the scorching sun with his hands raised high, and his face was full of excitement as he gave a speech against the Targaryen family. The believers of the seven gods already attach great importance to the monk class, not to mention the lack of entertainment in this era, so many people who are not pious can't help but watch this, treating it as a drama. Of course, there are relatively few such people. Most civilians are listening attentively, and some pious people are even angry from time to time with the monk's high-pitched voice. As one of the golden robes on duty here, Peter couldn't help but look at the monk in the crowd at this time, and his mind was thinking about it from time to time. As a young man born at the end of the Targaryen dynasty, Peter had no ill feelings towards the Mad King who was spurned by the nobles in his early years, because the people of King's Landing had never been affected by the Mad King's madness, and many people even missed the Targaryen era, because life at that time was more stable than it is now. Later, when he heard that the Mad King wanted to burn down the entire city when the war failed, Peter had a slight prejudice against Targaryen, but this did not really happen after all, and they could not be sure whether the news was true or false, so he still had a certain goodwill towards Targaryen. Relatively speaking, Peter did not like the current kingdom, and many people in King's Landing did not like it. This was not only because of the crazy plundering of the Queen's family in the city, but also because the current king was not a wise man. On the contrary, the king's reputation of loving prostitutes had spread throughout King's Landing. This kind of king is not worthy of being called a king. Peter occasionally couldn't help thinking so when he heard the relevant news, and when he heard that the survivors of Targaryen might fight back, he was secretly looking forward to it. It's just that his thoughts have changed again during this period. The Targaryen family colluded with the pagans and wanted to establish other religious beliefs in Westeros. This matter was initially spread only in a small area of King's Landing, but in the past 2 days, many monks have begun to spread it widely, so Peter, or many people, had to pay attention to it. Some things have changed because of this. Aunt Sophie from the neighbor's house used to hate the current environment more than Peter, but in the past 2 days, she would curse every morning and claim that the Targaryen was a traitor. Colin, a friend who originally firmly supported Targaryen, also believed that those people belonged to the ranks of enemies and were not trustworthy. Even Peter's own wife would nag him after dinner every day, claiming that if there were really Targaryens coming, they must be beaten back, and she didn't want to convert. As a relatively pious person, Peter didn't want his beliefs to be tainted by foreign pagans, so he empathized with this, but he was skeptical about the church's propaganda. Because the church is not trustworthy. As a man who thinks he is smart, Peter does not blindly believe in the church. Over the years, he has seen many monks who look solemn and dignified, but they are not good people, especially the fat and greedy archbishop, who does not look like the spokesperson of the gods in the world. So what they preached could be the truth? I really can't stand it, Peter. A low voice came from the side. Peter looked sideways and found that his companion, who was standing in the shadow of the wall to cool off like him, was rubbing his arm and looking depressed. This is not the same as before. Such heavy training and such hot weather. Who can stand it? What can you do if you can't stand it? Do you want to quit like Hobber? I have this idea, but I can't bear the wages. The companion replied in a low voice. Peter pursed his lips and said nothing. The new garrison commander came up with a training system as soon as he took office. The rigorous training was completely different from the previous casual training. Many people complained about it and thought that it was too bad now compared to the past. Therefore, Peter often heard about someone resigning from the garrison to find another way out because they couldn't stand it. Peter also wanted to resign, but it was not because of the intensity of the training. In fact, he felt okay about it, mainly because the punishment scene that lasted for a whole day a while ago was too horrible. Many familiar faces lost their lives that day. The expressions of each of them were extremely hideous when the ropes were tightened around their necks. Many of his colleagues who were watching, including him, were scared to death on the spot. Although he knew that they had brought it upon themselves, such cruel punishment still made Peter think that it seemed a bit dangerous to continue staying in the garrison. He felt that the methods of the Minister of Justice who took over them were really cruel and excessive. However, after thinking about it, Peter hadn't figured out what he could do after leaving the garrison, so he could only stay like this. Now that he heard that his companions wanted to leave, he couldn't help but persuade them. If you want to leave, think about what to do first. I've thought about it. The companion turned around and looked around, then whispered, I heard that the king will issue a bounty war on Crabclaw Peninsula in a while, and anyone can take it. The head of a person on the peninsula is worth 1 gold dragon. 1 gold dragon. Just go there and kill someone, and you can earn so much. It's much better than staying here. 1 gold dragon is their salary for several months. Peter heard a little bit unbelieving. King Robert is so generous. King Robert has always been very generous. The companion replied, and then encouraged, how about we go together? Is this news true? Peter was still very skeptical. My uncle's kid is working as a kitchen helper in the Red Castle. I heard that King Robert said it himself, so it can't be false. Let's wait until the news comes out. Peter felt that it was unreliable, so he shook his head. And do you know where Crabclaw Peninsula is? I heard it's near Maiden Spring, not far away. I don't think it's safe. If I quit my job and go there and can't make any money, then you stay here and continue to suffer. The companion said disdainfully, I don't want to do it anyway. Maybe one day I will be hanged by that cold-blooded duke. How can you be hanged if you don't make mistakes? Who hasn't made mistakes after being a gold cloak for so many years? The companion asked back. Peter didn't say anything when he heard it, but he was secretly a little scared. Not to mention others, he secretly accepted bribes from a gang leader in Flea Bottom a while ago. If he was targeted by the cold-blooded duke with amazing interrogation methods, he couldn't help but shudder. Chapter 242, Changes in Situation. The beginning of the year 295 of the Conquest era was a turbulent year. The Twins, which was adjacent to the north, became an empty city overnight. All the free family members disappeared. Correspondingly, the river below the Twins occasionally washed out broken skeletons of sticky flesh. At the same time, a very serious wolf disaster broke out in this area. Merchants passing by suffered heavy losses one by one. The trade route in the north was blocked. The Tully family, the Lord of the Riverlands, was currently recruiting soldiers to hunt and investigate the truth. According to the merchants who came to King's Landing, a group of wolves that looked like humans appeared in the Twins area, and ordinary wolves were gathered by those monsters, so those monsters were the murderers. This matter has become a strange talk in King's Landing, but unfortunately it is far away, so no one can confirm the truth of the news. At the same time, people in King's Landing also have no shortage of topics to talk about, so after the news spread for a while, no one paid attention to it. At present, King's Landing is in turmoil because of a bounty. Once the bounty for Crabclaw Peninsula was announced, it quickly spread throughout King's Landing. The hired knights who could not find suitable jobs during the non-war period signed up without hesitation. Some idle people also began to call their friends after seeing the high bounty, ready to make a fortune. The huge city with a population of nearly 500,000 people continued to lose people. Nearly 30,000 people left in just 1 week. At this time, the Iron Throne had not paid any money for the bounty except for some necessary preparations. After the preliminary figures were reported, the bold king laughed. However, the king laughed, but the Prime Minister John Arryn could not laugh, because he needed to strictly control everything during the bounty period. During this period, his hair, which was not much, fell several strands in a row. Early preparations, midterm rules maintenance, and late bounty payment. The bounty method sounds feasible, but there are many loopholes that need to be kept an eye on. The most important thing is to avoid fishing in troubled waters and strictly limit the killing to the inside of the peninsula. This series of procedures is no easier than starting a war, and it is even more difficult because it is the first time to do such a thing. At the same time, Jon Arryn also needs to keep an eye on everything that happens in the Vale. Earl Gerald Grafson of Gulltown betrayed several lords and nobles who had contact with Targaryen, but those lords refused the call of the Iron Throne to come to King's Landing to meet the king. After several fruitless negotiations, the old Duke of the Vale brazenly called on his lords to send troops to encircle and suppress the rebellion for him. Most of the lords of the Vale are actually still loyal to the Arryn family, so as soon as the call appeared, they began to prepare for the upcoming war. A small number of those whose loyalty is worrying did not jump to the enemy side, but chose to wait and see, or perfunctorily deal with it. The final result of this matter has not yet been released, but according to the current situation, the rebel camp composed of only 3 lords is unlikely to cause any waves. However, despite being very stable, the old Prime Minister or everyone in the Royal Conference did not relax their vigilance. After all, no one knows what will happen before the danger is extinguished. Renly is also keeping an eye on this matter, but he has a lot of things to do recently, so he doesn't put all his thoughts on it. Not long ago, he had a meeting with the fat Archbishop of the church and successfully persuaded him to call on the monks to boycott Targaryen, but this does not mean that Renly has given up the idea of changing the Archbishop. He is still looking for qualified candidates. In addition, he is also busy presiding over the trial. One of the king's daily tasks is to convene a court to try cases in the city. One of Renly's main jobs is to provide advice to the king during the trial. But Robert is an impatient person. Although he has frequently attended important royal meetings due to various things during this period, it does not mean that he will sit in an iron chair and preside over justice for the common people. Even before the Targaryen incident, he rarely attended royal meetings. So the cheap brother threw this matter to Renly, the Minister of Justice. In fact, the job of the Minister of Justice does not include the responsibility of presiding over the trial. Normally, this kind of thing is the job of the Prime Minister, or in other words, the things that the king does not want to do are the work of the Prime Minister. In a sense, the Prime Minister is equivalent to the king's representative or substitute. It's just that the old Prime Minister has been very busy recently, so this task can only be done by Renly. The series of hangings a while ago scared many people, but also made Renly win a lot of praise among the civilian class. At the same time, relying on his psychic talent, the cases he tried were basically not wrong, so that some victims in King's Landing who did not trust the Iron Throne have recently gone to the Red Castle to appeal. More and more people, his work as the Minister of Justice has become more and more arduous. This has made Renly's reputation grow day by day, but the price is that he basically has no time to do other things all day. Renly is a little helpless about this, but he is not too irritated, because he actually has no urgent important things to do recently. In addition to keeping an eye on the situation in various parts of the Seven Kingdoms and the church, he can only prepare for the Dornish envoys who are about to arrive. The number of personnel in the Capital Guard has dropped sharply to less than 4,000. My lord, should we start to stabilize people's hearts? The barbarian Samwell, with his arm wrapped in bandages, asked this question, while looking at the black-haired young man sitting behind the desk in deep thought. The harsh punishment and high reward have made the people in the Capital Guard panic. Some retail investors with no backing and idlers have been resigning from their jobs recently, so that they are increasingly short of manpower. During the reign of Viserys I, the Capital Guard had only 2,000 personnel, but now we have nearly 4,000. Renly glanced and answered, but before the other party could respond, he changed the subject. Is it difficult to recruit people? There are many people who signed up, but few are qualified. The tall new commander of the garrison answered. He was attacked some time ago, but in fact the injury was not that serious. The claim that he was seriously injured was just Renly's excuse. Now it has been only half a month since the incident, and he is almost healed. It doesn't need to be too strict, just ensure loyalty. Renly put forward his own opinion. This world lacks everything, but it does not lack people. A decent job is very attractive, no matter where in the Seven Kingdoms, so even if the number of garrison members is greatly reduced, Renly does not care, and is even more happy to see it. After all this trouble, although the rotten flesh is removed, and the new skin is regenerated, the capital garrison has become relatively fragile, but it is no different from being much stronger than before. In Renly's view, although the rotten flesh that has been removed is large, it is a complete drag, and although the new skin is still small, it can be controlled by itself. A fool can tell which is good and which is bad. After chatting with the ancient man about the situation of the garrison for a while, Renly changed the subject and asked, will the Dornishman you mentioned last time really come with the envoys? If the leader is indeed that a Barin, then she should not be absent. The barbarian Samuel replied. Renly nodded when he heard it. The she mentioned by the barbarians is a Dornishman who was born more than 200 years ago and is a member of the Ancient Alliance. However, unlike the others, she is more powerful. A few years after arriving here, she hooked up with the younger brother of the Dornish prince, a guy nicknamed Red Vipir. According to the calculations a while ago, I still owe 9 chapters, but I took a leave yesterday and owed 2 chapters. At the same time, the recommendation votes and monthly votes have increased by 2 chapters in total during this period, so I still owe 13 chapters. Chapter 243, Stannis aged prematurely. Before the Dornish envoys arrived at King's Landing, Renly saw another person he had not seen for a long time, Stannis Baratheon, his cheap second brother. The last time Renly saw Stannis was at his wedding. Now 5 years have passed, and he feels that he has changed a lot. His face has become colder and harder, and he looks like a man made of stone. He is wearing a simple fur-lined leather armor and pants, standing under the Iron Throne with his back straight. The most obvious change is Stannis' forehead. His hair, which was not thick but normal, has become bald now, with only a circle of black hair around his head. He is only in his early 30s and already looks like this, obviously aging before his time. When he saw Stannis, he was reporting some things about the Stormlands to Robert, and then hurried out of the Red Castle to the port to understand the work situation. This is the Lord High Admiral, and he is in charge of the Royal Fleet. So Renly didn't have time to say much to him, but they had time to chat for a while that night. If the Lord cannot uphold justice, then what is the need for him to exist? Caspar Wilder protected his son and openly disobeyed my orders. He must be punished. In the noisy and lively banquet, the bald middle-aged man sitting on one side of the long table said to Renly, Robert asked me to consider the overall situation, and I did consider the overall situation. Otherwise, I would have castrated Caspar Wilder's son directly instead of sending him to the wall. He was talking about a dispute with King Robert in the throne room during the day. The specific situation was that the son of the Earl of Rainhouse in Stormland raped a fisherman's daughter near Storm's End. After Stannis found out, he personally ran to Rainhouse and dragged the criminal out and sent him to the wall as a labor reform prisoner, which resulted in a protest from the Earl of Rainhouse. Robert thought this approach was ill-considered, but Stannis felt that he had let him off. So after a few words, the situation when the two Baratheons met during the day seemed unpleasant. Renly supports his second brother emotionally, but rationally. Such a treatment will indeed make the Earl of Rainhouse City emotional, and may cause variables. It is better to detain him in Storm's End first, and then castrate him, after we solve the problem. While chewing a piece of cream cake with a dagger, Renly expressed his opinion, or it can be said, that it was an afterthought. The territory of Rainhouse City is by the sea. If Earl Caspar Wilder rebels because of this, it will cause certain troubles. He has 7 sons. Stannis said disapprovingly, if he really betrays us because of one son, then his oath of loyalty is really not as loud as a fart. Renly shrugged his shoulders and said nothing more. Speaking of which, Earl Caspar Wilder has a little connection with him. The first denture medium he got in his early years was obtained from the son of the Earl of Rainhouse City. His son was a coach at Storm's End at that time. As a result, he wanted to betray because of hunger during the siege of Storm's End. After being discovered, he was imprisoned as a reserve food. Later, the Onion Knight brought a lot of fish to avoid being eaten, but he died of fright in the cage. So, what the cheap second brother said was not correct, because this time, they had already made Lord Caspar Wilder lose 2 sons. Thoughts were surging in his mind, and Renly did not think about it, but changed the subject and asked, "Why didn't my niece Shireen come with you? She is too young, and Celis won't let her go out. I will visit her after I finish my work here. Shireen is very cute, you will like her." The two brothers who had been separated for a long time were reminiscing in a low voice, and the fat bald king over there did not pay much attention to Stannis, the nominal protagonist of the welcome banquet, but was happily drinking with a man wearing a red and green feather cloak. The feather cape was colorful, and it would look very fancy on a normal person, not to mention that the person was a black man with a body as black as ink. The contrast of colors made him particularly conspicuous in the banquet, but the nobles who participated in the banquet were basically accustomed to his existence, so they didn't look at him much. The black man was called Jarabathor, and he came from a place called the Summer Islands, which was very far away from Westeros, and separated by a sea. Jarabathor was a prince who was expelled from the Summer Islands. He fled to Westeros a few years ago, and was blessed by the Iron Throne. Because he was unwilling to fail, he always hoped that Robert would send troops to help him regain the ruling power of the territory in the Summer Islands, but he never succeeded. However, although he had never succeeded, Jarabathor did not give up this idea. In order to please him, he, who originally didn't like drinking, even gradually became a big drunkard who couldn't live without wine, and his drinking capacity was almost the same as that of the Fat King. Jarabathor could not guarantee other aspects, but he thought he and the Fat King had a good match in drinking. He had participated in several banquets and always made the other party drink happily, which was also the hope for his success. However, he did not know what happened today. He had obviously competed with many cups and even began to feel dizzy, but the other party was still energetic, as if he was drinking water instead of wine. At first, Jarabathor could still hold on, but later he could not hold on anymore. He shook his head and his eyes were blurry. Finally, he could not help it anymore. His body tilted, and he fell to the ground with a plop from the chair. He was groaning and unconscious. The people around laughed at this, and the Bold King was very proud of this. Then he dragged another person to continue the drinking competition. Robert was very happy these 2 days, because he suddenly found that his drinking capacity was getting stronger and stronger. The amount that could get him drunk in the past had no effect at all at the moment. Moreover, he did not know why, but he felt that the more he drank, the more energetic he was. Lord Jon Arryn, the Prime Minister at the other side of the banquet, was also thinking about his changes in the past 2 days. Frequent work made him, who was old, feel a little overwhelmed in many things, but in the past 2 days, he found that, as long as he sat in a chair to handle official business, he would suddenly become energetic and clear-headed, as if he had driven the old age out of his body. However, when he left his workstation, this feeling would disappear without a trace, and fatigue would take over again. Such an abrupt change made the old Prime Minister feel very uncomfortable, and he seriously suspected that he was cursed by some wizard. He was alert in his heart, but he did not find any clues. At the same time, that special feeling made him gradually indulge in work, and he was not even willing to go back to his room to rest recently. He also found that his body seemed to be getting healthier because of this. "Prime Minister, long time no see." A voice interrupted the old man's meditation, and when he looked up, a handsome short and thin man came into his sight. "It's Petty." The old man smiled. "Did you come back with Lord Stannis?" "Yes." The visitor said respectfully, "I also want to thank the Prime Minister for his cultivation. You have the ability. I will naturally support you." The old man waved his hand and replied, "Do a good job next time. I will not let the Prime Minister down." The middle-aged man named Petty said without hesitation after hearing this, but a hint of sneer flashed in the depths of his eyes when he looked at the old man. "Thank you to the book friend Meliki and Woody for the 5,000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Heath Ice-T for the 1,000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Zyanatang 246 and the book friend Yajai 2304 for the 100 reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 244 Seeds and Closeness. The sound of metal colliding rang out continuously from a remote courtyard in the Red Castle. Two young men in simple leather armor were attacking and defending with swords. One of them had brown hair and blue eyes and was tall, while the other had black hair and blue eyes and delicate features. The brown-haired young man was responsible for the attack. His aggressive attacks looked powerful, while the black-haired young man on the defensive side moved forward and backward in a measured manner. He only defended with his long sword and did not attack. His expression did not change during the continuous defense, and he seemed to be at ease. After going back and forth, time passed slowly. The attacker was finally exhausted and panted. He stood with his sword and took the initiative to end this practice. Some progress. Renly smiled and encouraged the other party after sheathing his sword. At the same time, he threw the weapon in his hand to the fat boy, who was waiting at the side, and turned to walk out of the courtyard. Any new changes in your body? My strength has increased, young master. The brown-haired Tob answered, panting behind Renly, while the fat boy Sam with the bowl cut followed behind him honestly with his sword in his arms. I feel I'll learn faster when I practice than before. Is it like this for all weapons? No. Tob shook his head, only long swords and shields, and lances. Renly nodded and said nothing more. Before Stannis came to King's Landing, the man beside him rushed over from Dragonstone with his squire Samwell, so Renly spread some of the power seeds. Through his secret observation, the scattered power seeds seemed to have begun to show results, but the fusion was not very obvious at the beginning. Relatively speaking, Tob, who had been fusion with power seeds for a longer time, changed a lot. He was stronger, faster, and more skilled in using weapons. These were secondary. The most obvious change was that during sparring, Renly could clearly feel that every time the weapons collided, there would be waves of special vibrations on the opponent's weapon. This feeling was nothing once or twice, but after many times, Renly found that his body began to ache slightly, but his current recovery ability was far superior to that of ordinary people. After stopping sparring, this feeling disappeared after a while. He had no idea what was going on. Tob hadn't even noticed the vibration yet, so it was obviously useless to ask. The only thing Renly could be sure of was that, if a normal knight fought Tob, the longer the battle, the greater the chance of failure, and this was very fatal to a tank-type knight. What kind of changes would happen in the future? Thinking about this as he walked back, Renly was looking forward to it. How is the garrison? Everything is fine, but there are too many new recruits who need training. How is the new commander? Very strict, but also very capable. Any news from your mother? My mother said that she plans to train intelligence personnel in Silk Street recently. The boy who used to blush when he spoke can now speak normally, but his personality is still dull. Renly didn't care about this. After being transferred from Dragonstone to King's Landing, he arranged Tob to join the capital garrison. On the one hand, he supervised the situation in the garrison for him, and on the other hand, he could easily contact intelligence personnel outside the Red Castle. Under normal circumstances, Renly would not leave the Red Keep, so a special liaison is essential, otherwise it would be very troublesome. Notify Samwell when you get out, maybe he wants to meet this fat guy with the same name as him, Renly said, turning his head to look at the little guy who followed him silently. When the other heard Renly mention him, he couldn't help but shudder, and then smiled at Renly cautiously. The heir of the Tully family had actually become familiar with Renly when they were on Dragonstone, and he was not so restrained at first, but after arriving in King's Landing and hearing that Renly had hanged more than 100 people a while ago, he was scared again, like a fat pig following a tiger's butt, ready to escape at any time, for fear that he would be swallowed. Renly was speechless about this, and even thought about whether to feed him an ancient road seed to improve his cowardly character, but he didn't want his servant to become a bandit. That would be worse than the current situation. Uncle Renly. A loud greeting sounded from not far away. Looking up, a blond boy in luxurious clothes was waving at him. When he saw Renly looking over, he even ran over happily. Where are you going, Uncle Renly? The boy who ran over asked curiously. Of course I'm going to handle official business, Renly replied, and at the same time, glanced at the tall guard with disheveled hair following behind the boy, causing the other party to look back expressionlessly. Handling official business again. The blonde boy was a little disappointed when he heard this. When are you going to take me to training, Uncle Renly? Didn't we agree on it? After I'm done with this busy period, Renly replied with a smile. You can let Xander train you first, Joffrey. He is an excellent warrior. He is a dog. How can a dog train me? The blonde boy said disdainfully, then scratched his head. Then I will go first, Uncle Renly. Don't forget what you promised me. Of course. Renly nodded, and the other party grinned at him and bared his teeth at the fat boy Samwell who was following behind him. Seeing that the fat boy was frightened and stepped back, he turned around and left with his strong guards. Is he Prince Joffrey, my lord? After the boy walked away, Tob couldn't help asking behind him. Yes. Renly nodded. I heard that Prince Joffrey had black hair. It suddenly turned golden a while ago. Renly replied and continued on his way. Joffrey's hair color turned golden, which caused quite a stir in the Red Castle. However, because of Robert's presence, everyone thought that it must be some sneaky wizards who were at work, but no one doubted the truth. At the same time, unlike Samwell who was frightened, Joffrey, who had not talked to Renly much before, suddenly seemed to have found an idol. Since Renly did that thing, he went to Renly every now and then to ask questions, and always hoped that his uncle Renly would personally train him to become a knight. Not only him, but Robert's other two children also liked Renly very much. The little princess named Myrcella would run to him every time she saw him and ask for a hug. The youngest Tommen was also a curious baby, and he had a kind of elder-like admiration for Renly. It can only be said that this matter was a bit messy, and sometimes it gave Renly a headache, but for now, the Lannister problem didn't need to be paid much attention to. He decided that it would not be too late to think about it after solving the Targaryen problem. After walking for a while, Tob left and Renly took the fat squire back to the exclusive tower of the Lord Chancellor. He had originally thought of reading a book while he had some free time, but someone came to inform him to get ready soon. The Dornish envoys would arrive outside King's Landing this afternoon. I'm not in a good state, so I'll only update twice today. Chapter 245 Special Request. As an ancient person who came here more than 200 years ago, Nymeria thinks that her life is not bad now. She has no worries about food and clothing, and her safety is also guaranteed. Although she is a mistress, the status of mistresses in Dorne is different from that in other places in the Seven Kingdoms. Moreover, her lover is a Barin, the younger brother of Prince Doran of Dorne. Normally, everyone who sees her will be polite to her. Of course, the identity of a mistress cannot be compared with her previous identity as the daughter of the Earl of Hellgate, but that is already in the past tense, and she has no choice at all. At present, life is simple and fulfilling. Nymeria does not need to do anything else. She only needs to accompany her lover and her lover's lover. Yes, her lover Oberyn has other mistresses, and Nymeria can see that mistress every day. It can even be said that she became Oberyn's mistress because she was introduced by the woman named Illyria herself. In a sense, she is still her sister. Her elder sister Illyria is an illegitimate child and was a prostitute in her early years. Her status is very different from that of Nymeria, but her lover Oberyn does not fancy this. Otherwise he would not have chosen Nymeria, who has no status, as his female companion. At the same time, Illyria is also bisexual and is very interested in Nymeria. The three of them hang out together every day and have a quite harmonious relationship. Her lover Oberyn likes them very much and takes them with him wherever he goes, even if he goes to the distant King's Landing this time. Nymeria has never been to King's Landing, whether it is life in ancient times or now, but she is very concerned about it, or she is very concerned about it outside of Dorne, because she has many kindred from ancient times active in various parts of the Seven Kingdoms. Nymeria has been contacted by her kind before. Nymeria does not know why she can be found, but she is not resistant to her kindred. Every time she sees them, she always feels happy like meeting a fellow countryman, so even though she heard that this trip is not so simple, she is still very happy to go out. In contrast, along the way, he found that his sister Illyria didn't seem to be in such a good mood as her. She always seemed worried whether they would be in danger in King's Landing, and worried that her lover Oberyn would impulsively do something radical. Nymeria understood why she thought so, because her lover Oberyn's sister was brutally killed by the current queen's family, and Oberyn had a close relationship with his sister. However, she thought Oberyn was a very responsible person. Since this mission was to discuss marriage, he should not do anything else. Speaking of marriage, Nymeria had to think of Princess Irian, who was following the team. Princess Irian was very beautiful, but like Illyria, she looked worried all the way. Nymeria thought she might be worried about what kind of person her fiancé would be. She was actually very curious about this. When she was in Dorne, all the news from the outside world seemed to be blocked by the endless mountains on the border of Dorne. Under normal circumstances, she could not hear about what was happening outside. Nymeria only occasionally heard from her lover that Princess Irian's fiancé Renly seemed to be a young knight with outstanding abilities, and seemed to have suppressed many lords and nobles in the River Bay. This made Nymeria quite fond of Renly, whom she had never met, because in her time, the people of the River Bay were fighting fiercely with Dorne. After arriving outside King's Landing, she met the person in question. He looked so handsome and elegant that Nymeria was amazed. When her lover Oberyn introduced herself to him, the strange eyes that met her made Nymeria's heart beat faster unconsciously. So she kept paying attention and observing. The more she looked, the more she felt that this person named Renly was very outstanding and seemed to be loved by the people in this city. Many people along the way responded with respectful eyes, but she found that for some reason, Princess Irian and the team seemed a little absent-minded, as if the fiancé was not to her liking. Nymeria was very puzzled by this. She knew that Princess Irian was very eager to find someone of the same age to marry, because over the years, Prince Doran of Dorne always found some old men to match Princess Irian, and now this person of the same age was the first one, not to mention an excellent person of the same age. But Nymeria was not familiar with Princess Irian. Although she felt strange, she did not ask. In addition to observing Renly, her mind was mostly focused on paying attention to this city. King's Landing is a very large city, which surprised Nymeria, who had always been in Dorne and had never been out. However, there were too many people here, and the smell was very bad, which reduced her impression score of the city, but it was also an eye-opener. Then she participated in a welcome dinner held in a castle deep in the city. Here Nymeria saw many glamorous nobles, but she was a little disappointed when she found that the king who nominally ruled Dorne was a fat drunkard. However, there were many things that attracted her attention during the banquet. Funny dwarf jesters, beautiful bards, amazing acrobats. Everything about the banquet seemed very lively, and the dance session afterwards made Nymeria feel even more happy, because Renly, who made her heart beat faster, personally invited her to dance and treated her very politely. It was just that some of the topics raised during the dance made Nymeria feel a little confused, but this did not affect her aftertaste after the dance. In contrast, when another person invited her to dance soon after, it seemed very dull, which made Nymeria lack interest. The third person surprised her, because this big man named Samuel turned out to be her fellow countryman. But it didn't take long for her to find that this fellow countryman was not very interesting and had other intentions for her. This disappointed Nymeria, but she did not forget that she had promised another fellow countryman to join an alliance a few years ago to help each other with other fellow countrymen, so she did not refuse the other party's request. It was just that she felt that the other party's request was very strange. You mean, you want me to say more good things about the Baratheon family in front of Oberyn? Yes. The dance partner named Samuel replied, it's better to say bad things about the Targaryens as well. Nymeria blinked when she heard this. It was impossible for her to betray her lover, because she was relying on being a mistress to make a living, but she didn't think it was a big deal to say such a mixed bag of praise and criticism, because she had a hatred for the Targaryens. After all, when she was born, Dorne had fought against the Targaryens many times. But, what's the use of this? Thank you to Zyanatang 246, Sikyle and Emu Beishao for the 100 rewards. Chapter 246 Hanging. There are nearly 200 members of the Dornish envoys, but most of them are guards. There are only a dozen official members accompanying them, and there are only two that Renly cares about. The leader of the team, a Baron Martell, is one, and so is the so-called marriage partner, Irian Martell. Oberyn is a thin man with black hair and black eyes, nicknamed the Red VIP, but when talking to him, there is no sign of any hostility or viciousness in this man. On the contrary, he is humorous, and seems to be full of goodwill. It seems that he really came for marriage. Relatively speaking, Princess Irian was much more tender. Although she acted a little embarrassed when facing Renly, Dornish women have always been known for their openness, so this embarrassment seemed a bit deliberate. Of course, without the psychic moment, Renly couldn't be sure of this. You danced wonderfully. After a dance at the banquet, Renly began to praise the petite, but plump black curly-haired woman in front of him. Thank you. The other person replied with a smile. His facial features were three-dimensional and beautiful, but his olive skin made Renly feel a little awkward. However, this did not prevent him from inviting the Dornish princess to sit down and talk at a wine table in the corner of the banquet hall. It's such a long journey from Dorne to King's Landing, isn't it tiring? He asked as he picked up the wine glass and bottle on the table, and then filled the two of them with wine himself. It's very tiring, but also very fulfilling. The scenery here is very beautiful. Princess Irian, who was dressed in an exotic style, praised. When she took the wine glass, her soft fingers touched Renly intentionally or unintentionally, but then he immediately dodged. This seemed to be teasing, and Renly raised an eyebrow at this. Then stay here for a while, after this matter is over? Of course, after this matter is over. Princess Irian, he pursed his lips, and answered with a smile. There was a special sense of purity in his black eyes as they blinked. Unfortunately, Renly, who had maintained the ability to channel the moment, was not fooled by this appearance at all. He glanced sideways at Oberyn, who was dancing with his mistress at the bull not far away, and unconsciously squinted his eyes, turned around and suddenly asked, "What do you think of this marriage?" The black-haired exotic beauty was stunned when she heard this, and then replied softly, "I will follow your father's arrangements." I mean, the marriage itself. Renly asked pointedly, "Do you think it is possible for our two families?" This made the other party frown, and then said, "Why is it impossible? We have already expressed our sincerity." Renly shrugged and said nothing more. Irian didn't say anything. She felt that the person in front of her was strange, and she even wondered if this young-looking guy had discovered something. However, thinking back carefully about everything before, she didn't realize where she was exposed. Could it be someone else? Thinking about it, she couldn't help but look at Nymeria, who was dancing with her uncle in the hall. The person named Renly danced with the uncle's mistress before, but Nymeria is a simple fool who doesn't know anything at all. She thought to herself, then looked at her uncle's other mistress, but shook her head again. Although that person is smart, he also doesn't know anything. Although her uncle dotes on her, he shouldn't tell others this kind of thing casually. Irian didn't think much about it. After all, the suspicion in her heart was just a trace, and it was just a guess. She wasn't sure. At the same time, the person in front of her also started talking about other topics, and her attention was gradually attracted. The man named Renly in front of her made a very special impression on Irian. He was young and handsome, and had a very alluring and mysterious temperament about him. If they had met in the past, Irian would definitely be attracted to it, but now, listen with a magnetic voice in her ears, she couldn't help but feel sad. Overall, the conversation was pleasant, because Renly didn't say anything that made her doubtful. Instead, he talked about various things in King's Landing, and also told some interesting jokes, which made Irian, who was worried, unconsciously. I felt really happy. However, when the banquet was over, and they returned to their assigned residence, this happiness disappeared. "What did he say to you?" Uncle Oberyn, who came for a secret conversation, asked in a low voice. "Nothing," Irian replied. "He is a very interesting person." Oberyn frowned upon hearing this. "Be careful, that Renly is not simple." "What's wrong?" Irian asked hurriedly. Of course she knew that Renly was not a simple man. Even the Dornish people had heard about what happened in the Reach. "That boy looks gentle and polite, but I just heard that not long ago he personally ordered the hanging of more than 100 of King's Landing's golden robes, without causing any objections." Oberyn said and touched it unconsciously. "Chin, it seems that Baratheon has good control over this city. Irian didn't know much about this, but she also knew that someone who killed more than 100 lives at every turn couldn't be simple, and when she thought of the former, he was a handsome young man, but it was hard for her to imagine that he could be so hot. This made Irian couldn't help but have doubts. Will our plan really succeed? Of course, if it can't succeed, why are we here? He doesn't seem like a person who is easy to take advantage of. Indeed, a friend of mine admires his intelligence very much, Oberyn hummed and said, but when the situation changes, even the smartest people will have no choice. I hope. Irian prayed silently. Their plan to come here this time was really risky, and she always felt very stressed. She didn't sleep well that night. She got up early the next morning and had breakfast with her uncle and his two mistresses in a separate hall. Irian found Nymeria eating. Everyone showed their interest in this place, and at the same time they seemed to be quite optimistic about this marriage, which made Irian secretly laugh. She felt that Nymeria, who was already in her 30s, was really simple enough, or rather childish for her age, but she turned her head and looked at Oberyn at the main seat, who was staring at him with a smile. Looking at Nymeria, who was chirping, her eyes were filled with love and care. Her uncle seemed to like the way she looked, Irian thought. The breakfast she ate made her feel uncomfortable, or the food outside of Dawn was never quite to Irian's taste, but at least it was enough to satisfy her. After dinner, Renly came over and invited them to visit King's Landing. Nymeria was very interested in this, and Uncle Oberyn seemed to want to talk to Renly more, to get to know him better. Irian, so I had to agree. King's Landing is a chaotic and crowded city. She thinks there is nothing interesting to see here. At the same time, the smell of this city is really unbearable to her. However, thinking of living here in the future, Irian resists her impatience and turns around to observe her surroundings. We have already come out anyway, so we can't go back on our words. Looking around, she suddenly saw a special scene at a crossroads. A large group of civilians were gathered around a wooden platform. On the platform, there were 3 prisoners with scars all over their bodies. She was enduring the hanging with a purple complexion, and the sight of her bulging eyes as she struggled endlessly made her a little unbearable. What crime did those people commit? She turned her head and asked Renly beside her. Prepared to assassinate the king. The other party replied lightly, they are the faceless men from the east. They sneaked into the Red Keep a while ago, but we discovered them. As soon as these words came out, Irian subconsciously thought of something. He couldn't help but look at his uncle Oberyn on the other side, and found that his face turned unsightly at this time. I have been really bad these past 2 days, and my writing has been flat. I have worked hard to make adjustments, and try to resume making up for corrections as soon as possible. Chapter 247, Leaking the Secret. The summer was hot, baking the air on the surface into a trance. The crowds around the crossroads were noisy, which aggravated the heat. Being in it, it felt particularly dull. The surrounding civilians were talking and cursing. Surrounded by the guards, a Baron, nicknamed the Red VIP, stared at the 3 prisoners struggling more and more weakly on the gallows. His face was not very good, but Renly beside him seemed not to see it. When the 3 prisoners were motionless, he even sent someone to tell the executioner to hang them for a while longer, so that the assassins would not fake their death and escape. It was not until the surrounding civilians who were watching the excitement dispersed that he turned around and called on this Dawn tourist team to continue moving forward. However, after this, the originally harmonious atmosphere quietly became a little tense. A Baron, the Red VIP in the team, glanced at Renly, the leader, with hostile eyes several times, but never did anything special. Not long after, the group arrived at the port area again. Because there were a large number of people staying here to escape the heat, it was also very noisy, which surprised the simple-minded Mistress Nymeria in the team. With so many people hiding here, is it that hot? The people of King's Landing are not as heat-resistant as the people of Dawn. Renly replied with a smile. Dawn is mostly desert, and the environment and climate are much more difficult than here. This can be seen from the surface. After walking for such a long time, the guards who were protecting the team's safety were sweating profusely, but these Dornishmen did not sweat at all. Then if they go to Dawn, won't they be killed by the heat? Not necessarily by the heat, but they may die of thirst. Simple people focus on simple things, while those who are not simple have discovered some special situations here. For example, there are warships anchored in the distance of the port, and soldiers are constantly boarding the ships. After Renly's patient explanation, the Dornishmen fully understand everything that has happened, or is about to happen on the Crabclaw Peninsula. They would not ignore that among the crowd of summer vacationers, several monks were spreading anti-Targaryen remarks in high-pitched voices, and those remarks attracted the echoes of the surrounding civilians. All this made Oberyn, the leader of the team, depressed, and coupled with the execution scene he saw before, he unconsciously had many associations, and felt quite irritated that Renly deliberately let us see these. When the sightseeing ended, and the Dornish people returned to their temporary residence, Oberyn the Red VIP said to his niece, "He is a very scheming person. Are those 3 hanged prisoners really the Faceless Men?" Irian asked hurriedly. "I'm not sure what their identities are." Oberyn said, "The plan is indeed for the Faceless Men to carry out the beheading, and Renly has already made it very straightforward. Has our plan been discovered?" The petite Dornish princess looked unsightly. "That's right." Oberyn gritted his teeth and answered. "Just as someone guessed, they came to King's Landing not for marriage, but to disrupt the situation here. In other words, the allies far outside Westeros promised to send the Faceless Men to assassinate several direct members of the Baratheon family, and hoped that Dorne would take this opportunity to intervene and create disputes. Their initial plan was to kill most of the Baratheon family, leaving only King Robert's only daughter Myrcella and Stannis Baratheon. In this way, the two sides would definitely fight, because according to the normal order of succession to the Iron Throne, Stannis, who is a man, must be crowned king, but according to Dorne's laws and the interests of the Lannister family, Myrcella is a real heir to the king. Unfortunately, the plan was well thought out, but it ended suddenly before it really started. Didn't they say that the Faceless Men's disguises had never been discovered? How were they exposed? Perhaps they were not the real Faceless Men. Renly just knew about our plan and deliberately let other prisoners impersonate them. Even so, he still discovered our plan. On the Dorne side, only you, me, and your father knew about this plan, so it must have been leaked by someone from the Targaryen side. Is there a traitor? Perhaps. Halfway through the conversation, someone suddenly knocked on the door. Oberyn frowned, walked over to open the door, and saw a fat man dressed as a servant standing outside the door timidly. When he was stared at, he couldn't help shrinking his neck, looking cowardly and timid. "Lord Renly called me to give this to you," the fat man said as he trembled and handed over a rolled up note in his hand. This fat man was Renly's servant. Oberyn had seen him before, so he frowned, but he took the note directly without hesitation. After opening the paper, he was stunned for a moment, then raised his eyes and asked hurriedly, "Is this true?" What is it?" the fat man asked blankly. Obviously, he knew nothing. Seeing this, Oberyn squeezed the paper tightly, and then said without hesitation, "Take me to see your master." The man's tone was urgent, as if there was something urgent. Seeing this, the fat man did not dare to hesitate, and immediately turned around and ran outside. Oberyn gave his niece a word in the house, and followed him. At this time, it was already late outside the building. The dim light radiated from the sky, dyeing the red bricks under the feet brilliantly. The two people, one big and one small, hurriedly walked one after the other, and finally met Renly in the tower exclusive to the Lord Chancellor. It seemed that he had been prepared. When the Dornishman entered the room, the black-haired young man did not show any surprise on his face, but smiled at the visitor. He had been in a hurry before, but after arriving at the house, the Red VIP of Dawn calmed down. He walked to a chair in front of Renly's desk and sat down, then crossed his legs. "Is it true what is written here?" he asked. Renly did not answer, but looked at Samwell, the servant at the door of the room, and after motioning him to leave, he said, "I don't need to fool you about this matter, and you also met the parties at the banquet last night. Hair color alone is not enough to prove that the 3 children are not Robert's children." Oberyn shook his head when he heard this. "Besides, I heard that even the king's hair turned golden a while ago. This is enough to prove that hair color can be changed using blood magic or witchcraft." Renly said meaningfully, "Besides, what do you think is the purpose of changing it all the time? Or who is covering up something?" Oberyn frowned when he heard this, and hesitated for a while without saying anything. Renly shrugged when he saw this. The content of the note he handed over before was very simple. He wrote that his brother was cuckolded, and his children were not his own. The purpose was naturally not to publicize the family scandal, but to prove that the Baratheon family and the Lannister family behind the Queen had an irreconcilable hatred, or in other words, Renly's purpose was to win over Dorne. At this time, the situation in the Seven Kingdoms was generally stable, and only Dorne was a seriously unstable area. The problem of Dorne was actually simple. When Robert rebelled, Dorne and Targaryen were in a marriage relationship. Prince Rhaegar, the heir to the Iron Throne of Targaryen, married Princess Elia of Dorne, the sister of the Red Viper in front of him. Later, during Robert's rebellion, Princess Elia and her children died tragically in the Red Castle. But in fact, their tragic death was not caused by Baratheon, but by Lannister. Lannister had not joined Robert's side at that time. They killed Princess Dawn and her children, which was equivalent to a letter of allegiance. So in the true sense, Dawn's enemy is Lannister, not Baratheon. That's why Renly wanted to prove to this Dornishman that Baratheon might stand against Lannister. But this alone is not enough. I know that Dawn has now allied with Targaryen. When Oberyn was thinking, Renly said, I also know that your sister's death makes you full of hatred. But is her death really our fault? As soon as the voice fell, the atmosphere in the room became tense. Thank you to the book friends I'm Yeon and the book friend Fami and Jumeo for the 500 reward, and thank you to the book friend Yajai2304 for the 100 reward. Chapter 248 The Cause of War. With the nickname Red Viper, Oberyn is certainly not a good-tempered person. The matter of his sister Elia is even more of a sore spot for him. However, the black-haired young man in front of him has always been mysterious and his methods are hard to understand. Even if he was angry, Oberyn did not show it. Instead, he said with a fake smile after hearing the words, Dawn has not formed an alliance with the Targaryens. Lord Renly, please do not slander us casually. Your sister died because of that war, so let's talk about the cause of the war first. Renly ignored the other party's sophistry, sat behind the desk, and said to himself, in the previous dynasty, Prince Rhaegar fell in love with Lyanna, the youngest daughter of the previous generation of Duke Stark in the north, at the tournament. Soon after, he ignored the fact that he already had a wife and a pair of children, and directly led people to kidnap the wolf girl of the Stark family and disappeared. Brandon, the heir of the Stark family at the time, was angry about his sister's kidnapping and went to King's Landing with his companions to ask the Mad King on the Iron Throne for her. As a result, they were detained by the Mad King. Later, the fathers of several detainees, including the old Duke of the North, were summoned to King's Landing by the Mad King and then burned to death. Brandon and his gang also died. It was that bitch from the Stark family who seduced Rhaegar. Oberyn retorted. What does it matter? Renly laughed, one willing to fight, and the other willing to be beaten. No matter what the truth is, your sister was abandoned by Rhaegar. Oberyn didn't say anything, his face was very gloomy. Seeing this, Renly continued, after burning the Duke of the North, the Duke's heir, the heir of the Vale, and many other families, the Mad King ordered the Duke of the Vale, Jon Arryn, to chop off the heads of his 2 adopted sons and offer them to the Iron Throne. One of these 2 adopted sons is the new Duke of the North, Eddard Stark, whose father and brother died, and the other is my brother Robert. For various reasons, Jon Arryn refused the Mad King's order, and the war broke out. These are facts, and there is nothing to refute, so Oberyn nodded. The North, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands. Soon after the war started, most of Westeros began to rebel against the Mad King. It was still unclear at the beginning, but as the war continued, the situation became clearer. At that time, you Dornishmen were allies of the Targaryens. In order to prevent your allies from having any disloyalty, the Mad King detained your sister and your sister's children in King's Landing, and personally guarded them. The purpose was to restrain the Dornish army. At the same time, he was afraid that something unexpected would happen in King's Landing. So for safety reasons, the Mad King sent his wife and children to Dragonstone. Sure enough, when the Lannisters pretended to be Targaryen allies and successfully opened the gate of King's Landing, accidents and tragedy struck. Having said that, Renly paused and looked at the gloomy Dornishman in front of him. he said sarcastically. Your sister was left in King's Landing and eventually died tragically under the slaughter of the Lannisters. The Mad King's children were sent to a safe place and escaped. Those who were sent to Dragonstone are your Dornishman's allies at this moment. I've said before that Dorne has not formed an alliance with the Targaryens. A Baron sneered. At the same time, I know the inside story of my sister's death better than you do, so I don't need you to repeat it. Really? Renly was unmoved. Then who do you think you can blame for this? Lannister is a butcher who tortured and killed your family with his own hands. But if it weren't for the Mad King's coercion of Dorne, how could your sister and her family face such a disaster? Or, in other words, if it weren't for your brother-in-law having an affair and betraying your sister, which then triggered the war, how could your sister die? A Baron narrowed his eyes slightly, looking at Renly with hostility, as if he was furious, because Renly kept exposing his scars one after another. However, he did not attack him violently, but after a moment of silence, he suddenly laughed. So what do you want to say? Baratheon is innocent, and is the ally we should unite with, of course. Renly nodded. I don't deny that Baratheon is responsible in this matter, but it is obvious that Baratheon is the party with the least responsibility. When the Lannisters swindled King's Landing and started the massacre, they had not yet stood on Baratheon's side, nor did they communicate with us in advance. They took the initiative to kill the entire Targaryen family. So you decided to exchange Lannister for Dorne? A Baron, who was crossing his legs, shook the note in his hand and changed the subject to business. If I could choose, I would stand on the side of Lannister, because Lannister is stronger than Dorne. Renly said frankly, but this incident was unpredictable and could not be reconciled, so Baratheon and Lannister could no longer maintain an alliance, at least not for a long time. So why do we have to keep them against Dorne? Do you really trust me that I won't tell anyone about this? A Baron seemed to have regained his sanity and asked with interest, if this is true, it would be a big handle. Think about it, watching you Baratheon and Lannister fighting each other would only benefit Dorne and not harm it. Even if you tell it, no one will believe it. Renly said calmly, because you have no evidence. Others will only think you are randomly trying to sow discord. Do you have evidence? I have, but I can't show it to you now. Renly replied. In fact, he had no evidence, but he could catch the adulterer in bed anytime and anywhere and interrogate the truth. But this could not be done casually, at least not at the moment. Then how can I be sure that you are telling the truth? A Baron asked. Perhaps your purpose is to deceive us? I'm not saying this expecting Dorne to stand on our side directly. Renly said, but I hope you can consider it carefully. Lannister is your enemy, and so is Targaryen. Baratheon may become your ally, so why can't you remain neutral in future wars? A Baron narrowed his eyes at this, and Renly said meaningfully, remain neutral and wait for the war to end. This way, no matter who wins, Dorne's strength will not be damaged in the slightest. And you and I both know that whoever has the bigger fist in this world has the right. At that time, maybe your Dorne's fist is the biggest, and it will be very easy to track down the truth. A Baron didn't say anything. Renly continued, you've seen everything outside. The Targaryens are not welcome here, or rather, when the Targaryens united with those pagans, they were doomed to never rule Westeros again. So why stand on the side that is doomed to fail? If you don't want to stand with Baratheon, then just stand aside and watch the show. What do you have to lose? Nothing to lose, but nothing to gain either, a Baron said. Renly said it so bluntly that he no longer needed to hide anything. Even if you stand on the Targaryen side, what can you gain? Renly asked back, maybe after you support the Targaryen to take the throne, the next generation of kings will have Dornish blood, but what's the use of it? The Targaryen will never take the throne. Even if they defeat the Baratheons, they will never sit back on the Iron Throne when they unite with those pagans. This will not change unless you believe that those pagans will help the Targaryens without asking for anything in return. A Baron did not speak, and his expression remained unchanged, but Renly could see that his mood was completely different from the beginning. So he changed the subject and said, in this war, we don't mind Dorne watching the show on the sidelines, because Baratheon is confident and capable of defeating the Targaryens. And I can guarantee that, after dealing with the Targaryens, the next one will be the Lannisters. At that time, you and I can form an alliance, and even my brother's second queen can also consider a Dornish woman. What do you think?" Oberyn did not speak, and was silent for a moment. He finally looked at Renly deeply. "I have to go back and discuss with my brother. I can't give you any guarantees." "Of course." Renly nodded. "I believe Prince Doran will make a wise choice. There will be another chapter later." Chapter 249 Blue Eyes. The Dornish left, just as they had come, perfunctorily talking to the Iron Throne about the marriage for a while, and then hurriedly left King's Landing. This situation made many people feel very strange. Those who believed that the Dornish were sincere in the marriage were confused by the Dornish perfunctory attitude, and those who did not believe in the marriage and believed that Dornish was plotting a conspiracy were at a loss, because the Dornish did nothing. Except for Renly, no one in the entire King's Landing knew the specific situation, but whether they knew it or not, the future situation in Westeros was bound to change because of this. In other words, new changes occurred every day inside and outside the turbulent Westeros. In the valley, the three rebellious lords were besieged by other valley nobles, hiding in the castle for passive defense, and the attacking valley nobles also couldn't bear to attack by force. Most of the castles in the Seven Kingdoms have a history of thousands of years, and this kind of historic building has been tested for a long time, and is basically very easy to defend, and difficult to attack. A rash attack is bound to result in huge losses. So the Lords of the Vale started a war of attrition, which is very common in this world. The army besieged the city and prepared to slowly wear down the three rebellious nobles. However, according to the information obtained by the Iron Throne, if the war of attrition really continues, then this war will take at least a year to end. The supply can be borne by the Vale itself, which does not need to be borne by the Iron Throne, and the Iron Throne can even watch from the sidelines. However, it is difficult to kill the chicken to scare the monkey in a war of attrition, and there are too many variables, which is definitely not the best strategy. Renly clearly opposed this in the royal meeting, but his opposition was useless, because no one was willing to bear the loss caused by a strong attack, and forcing the Vale nobles to attack would only cause dissatisfaction or even resistance. So the war in the Vale began to waste time. The war situation on the Crabclaw Peninsula has made some progress. After the initial chaos, the bounty plan has been initially on the right track, but it will take some time to completely defeat that side. In addition, the investigation team that Renly had dispatched to the Riverlands also returned one after another, but they did not bring any new clues. They only claimed that there was a group of monsters and witches running rampant. Renly knew about the monsters, and he had also vaguely heard about a group of monsters, but the witches made him a little puzzled. However, the investigation team did not have more clues about this. They only heard that there were witches and monsters mixed there, but no one had seen it with their own eyes. It seemed very mysterious. Renly was very curious about this, but unfortunately he needed to keep a close eye on the situation in King's Landing at the moment, so he couldn't investigate anything in person. There was nothing else. Generally speaking, the Seven Kingdoms were peaceful. Several consecutive summers had made farmlands everywhere fruitful. From farmers to lords, the people of Westeros were getting richer and richer. Occasionally, there was news of nobles bullying men and women, and the lords of various places would solve it, which basically had nothing to do with the Iron Throne. Renly and King's Landing began to take some actions to govern the evil forces in the city. Changing Robert's hair color is not without cost. The deal with the Seven Gods is that the gods are responsible for hair dyeing, and Renly must rectify the law and order in King's Landing for this. This is very simple for him as the Minister of Justice. The evil forces in King's Landing have their own backers, but those backers can't rely on Renly, no matter how much they rely on. At the same time, he has a basic control over the Gold Cloaks, the capital garrison. If you need people, you have people, and if you need backgrounds, you have backgrounds. So the thieves and gangsters in King's Landing have suffered during this period. Under high pressure control, people have been cut off their hands and feet, or locked in dungeons, waiting for the Night Watchman of the Great Wall in the north to come and collect them. Those who are seriously injured are all hanged, so that new corpses are hung high on the walls of the Red Castle every day, in rows for people to watch. Some people came to Renly to protest, and some people secretly negotiated with him, but no matter whether they were protesting or negotiating, they would all be scared to death after seeing Renly, and immediately interrogate the people around them after returning, and they would not care about pleading for others. For a time, many people in King's Landing were full of resentment towards Renly, but those who supported him hated him dozens of times more. Every day, many civilians even ran to the Red Castle and shouted Renly's name. This situation was hard not to attract the attention of the Fat King, but he laughed and was full of joy about it, thinking that his brother's behavior really made Baratheon look good. Robert didn't care about who protested or anything, and he didn't care about those forces colluding, or in other words, as long as there was no big chaos, he basically didn't care about anything, whether it was good or bad. Therefore, after the initial stage, some people in King's Landing gradually got used to this high pressure situation, and unknowingly, the security situation in the entire King's Landing had also improved significantly. While the anti-gangster campaign was being launched in King's Landing, the situation outside Westeros was also very tense. Long ships for transportation or warfare were built one after another by the major shipyards of the free trade cities, and slave soldiers from all over the country were training diligently every day to prepare for the war that would soon begin. The rumbling sound of horse hooves, like an earthquake, also rang out from outside the cities. It was the team of the Dothraki, a nomadic people who roamed across the continent of Essos. They were ready to form an alliance with some people in the free trade cities because the horse god they believed in had been urging them to go to the west, to the continent of Westeros, to kill, and to find the door. The joining of the Dothraki made many people ecstatic because the number of warriors of this nomadic people was no less than 100,000, but some people were also worried about it. We should spread faith in the way that saved Westeros, rather than through barbaric acts such as conquest and invasion. In a dim temple, a slender red-robed woman knelt under a majestic statue, talking to a slovenly monk behind her without looking back. What can we do about the decision made by the high priest? The slovenly red-robed monk sighed and said, we have been in contact for so long, and there are less than 100 people who choose to support us. What can we do with such a small number of people? The joining of the Dothraki has given those people confidence, and they don't want to change their minds. The red-robed woman's voice was hoarse, and even revealed a hint of pain, which made the slovenly red-robed monk frown unconsciously. But that was a false god's method. In order to achieve his goal, Bonero abandoned the true god, and chose to collude with the false god. He is no longer worthy of being the supreme priest. The sloppy red-robed monk ignored this sentence, but asked worriedly, are you okay, Melisandre? The alliance with the Dothraki is doomed to fail. I saw it all in the holy fire. The hoarse voice said to himself, they are doomed to fail. The sloppy red-robed monk frowned even deeper, so he moved his footsteps and walked towards the woman kneeling under the statue. As a result, before he took 2 steps, the other party screamed, don't get close to me. The red-robed monk did not stop moving forward, but instead accelerated his pace. However, when he saw the other party's face clearly at this time, he couldn't help but stagger back. The delicate heart-shaped face of the red-robed woman was pale at this moment. Her eyes were closed, and her expression was painful, and in the center of her eyebrows, there was an oval bulge that kept trembling, as if something was struggling under the skin, trying to break through the epidermis and drew out. Melisandre, what's wrong with you? The slovenly monk asked tremblingly. No one responded to his words, but as the words fell, the bulge on the red-robed woman's forehead trembled more severely. Finally, after a strange staring sound, a bloody ice blue eye suddenly opened from her brow, shook a few times, and stared closely at the frightened slovenly monk not far away. The invisible force spread out, and the nervous monk's face was stunned, and then his face became dazed. Chapter 250, Successive Failures. The shrill screams of monkeys came from not far away, attracting the attention of the girl by the pond in the forest garden. She looked sideways and saw 2 golden monkeys fighting each other on a tall elm tree not far away. One of them was pulling the other monkey's tail hard, while the other monkey poked its finger into its nostril. The 2 little guys kept rolling and jumping on the tree, fighting endlessly, accompanied by bursts of screams. Several times they looked like they were about to fall down, but they never landed. Sometimes they can even use their tails to hang their bodies and swing back and forth, which seems very agile. The zoo is really an interesting place. It seems that I will come here often in the future. The girl by the pond blinked and thought to herself, and the depression in her heart was somewhat dispelled. "Miss Renus, it's lunchtime," a voice whispered beside her, causing the girl in a warm yellow dress to divert her gaze. But after looking at the maid beside her, she just shook her head. "I won't eat lunch. I have no appetite." "But the lady is still waiting for you," the maid said embarrassedly. "Just say I've eaten it," the girl answered perfunctorily. "But," the maid hesitated, but in the end she didn't say anything, just nodded, and then hurried away to inform the lady she mentioned. Seeing this, the girl sighed. "Although more than 10 years have passed, I'm still not used to it." Thinking of this, she looked back at the pool in front of her. There were several chubby white fish swimming in the clear spring water. The girl poked it casually with her finger, and one of the fish suddenly swelled into a round ball that was more than 10 times larger. The bulging cheeks and the pouting of small eyes and small mouth seemed to be very angry, but it made people feel very funny. "This inflatable fish is really interesting." The girl couldn't help but smile, but then the depressed mood emerged again. The plan made cannot be said to be foolproof, but it is also very sure. After all, the faceless men of Bravos have basically never failed to assassinate their targets. Even if the opponent is the king of another continent, it is difficult to guard against the assassin who changes his identity at will. However, the news that came back a while ago was like a blow to the head, which made her a little confused. The 3 faceless men were actually caught and hanged by the man called Renly. They were discovered before they took action. I feel so sad. Why did this happen? Not only did the girl not understand this matter, but the thousand-faced god priest who contacted her also had no clue. But whether they can figure it out or not, it is a fact that the faceless men suffered heavy losses. This matter alone has given the girl a headache. The faceless men have a deep relationship with the ruling class of Bravos, but they are not completely vassals, or even if they are vassals, they are not something that a Sea King can completely control. Not to mention that she is just the daughter of the Sea King. At the beginning, the faceless men were able to be mobilized to assassinate the king because of their convenient identity, and the faceless men were also looking for a way out. Finally, and most importantly, she also took out a very important secret message of the Targaryen family in exchange for the implementation of this plan. However, it failed so completely now. The House of Black and White, the headquarters of the faceless men, had already informed them to give up the deal beforehand, and claimed that they would no longer cooperate with the girl, which made the girl quite angry, because those people could not complete the tasks they were supposed to complete, and they actually blamed her? What kind of logic is this? Sooner or later, I will completely control you. Crouching by the pool and constantly poking the fish with her fingers, the girl muttered, but she couldn't help but think of a name in her mind. Renly. The first plan failed at the hands of this guy, and now the second time it fell into the hands of this guy, which made the girl secretly hate it, and she was even so angry that she couldn't sleep at night. It's just that it's obvious that the enemy can't be solved by anger. It seems that this matter can only be blamed on herself for not understanding the enemy situation, but she thought she had already understood it very clearly. Her background, her growth process, what she learned. She even knew that Renly liked to read history. In the end, after understanding it over and over again, that person was still a fog. It would be fine if it was just that, but more importantly, every time the girl thought of that person's name, she felt familiar and even had an inexplicable urge to run over to find him. The surge came for no reason, and the familiar feeling also made the girl often think that she had a problem with her brain. In fact, she was now very inclined to think that she seemed to have some disease, because she felt that there were many strange things in her life. For example, she liked to grow flowers and garden, but she searched through her memories of her previous life and couldn't figure out how she liked such boring things. She should like singing and dancing, right? At the same time, she didn't know how she made up her mind to run outside Westeros, mix in various mysterious circles, and become a faceless man in her previous life. I remember correctly, she had always had a good relationship with her family. Why did they break up? And most importantly, she couldn't remember how she escaped from Dawn. According to the historical records of this world, she died in Dawn, but she knew clearly that she didn't die. Why didn't she die? She couldn't remember. Maybe this will happen after changing the body? The girl guessed. Obviously, there were gaps in her memories of her previous life, but what exactly was the gap? She couldn't figure it out, but she had a vague feeling that it seemed very important to her. Very, very important. But a hurried sound of footsteps interrupted the girl's thoughts. After concentrating on the little fish in the pool that was staring at her angrily, she sighed, then turned her head and looked in the direction of the footsteps and found that it was her trusted butler who came over. Is it the red monk who sent another letter? The girl asked. Or is it the group of bald heads? It's a letter from Dawn, Miss Renys. The butler handed the letter to the girl while speaking. The sun-lance mark on the envelope clearly showed that the letter was sent by the Martell family that ruled Dawn. It's really strange that the timid Prince Doran actually took the initiative to write a letter. The girl curled her lips at this, then opened the letter and took a look. Her face gradually darkened. Is there something wrong, miss? The butler with a wheel mark on his face asked cautiously. It's no big deal. The girl answered lightly, but she tore the letter in her hand into pieces with her little hands, and then threw it into the pool fiercely. You still dare to say that you are unyielding? I think they are just a bunch of turtles. After gritting her teeth, the girl stood up and paced back and forth several times, and finally couldn't help cursing, and then hurriedly stepped away. The neatly dressed butler was a little dumbfounded. Didn't hear it wrong. Miss Renys, who was always gentle and polite, just cursed. Fuck your mother. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.